Chapter 97. To search for hidden treasures 3, including Zihua's medicinal cauldron. These were all treasures that apothecaries would yearn for in their dreams. Countless experts on the continent have sought this obscure pill recipes in order to curry favors with apothecaries. However, after having flipped over the entire continent in their search, no one was able to find it. Yet, she would never have imagined that in her hunt for Su Luo, she had unexpectedly lucked out. She found obscure pill recipes, and even Zihua's medicinal cauldron. At this moment, Nun Lu almost went mad with joy. She trembled with jubilation and extreme excitement. She almost jumped up for joy in her elation. She reached out for the obscure pill recipes, but very quickly she withdrew her hand. She didn't dare, she was afraid of death. This was because the corpses lying haphazardly on the floor told her that Elder Zihua was definitely a poison expert. His belongings definitely could not be encroached upon by just anyone. You come here. Nun Lu raised her long sword to Su Luo's neck, coldly glaring at her as if looking at a dead man. You want to kill me to silence me? Su Luo lifted the corner of her lips in a slight smile that was not truly a smile. Kill you to silence you? Nun Lu laughed out loud. I definitely will kill you to silence you. Otherwise, if even half a word of what happened here were to spread from your lips, great trouble will befall our Jade Lake Palace. Therefore you must die. Really? Su Luo faintly smiled. Just great, she too had a similar notion. But right now, you can't die yet. Nun Lu used the long sword to threaten Su Luo and bellowed, bring that obscure pill recipes over here. Nun Lu wanted to appropriate everything here for herself, but she would not even dare to touch them. Obviously, she was being used as a lab rat. Su Luo felt a chill flashed across her heart. Her gaze fell upon the corpses on the floor. One had a dagger stabbed into it. Icy cold light reflected off the dagger. Fine. Su Luo did not refuse. She walked over step by step, with a harmless smile on her face. Quickly pick it up. Nun Lu coldly commanded. She wanted to use Su Luo to test for poison, to see if this obscure pill recipes had any poison on it. Right now, at this crucial moment, she must not die. Discovering Elder Zihua's cave. What other achievement could compare to it? Having this achievement in the future, even Qing Ning, that bitch, would be beneath her. Perhaps, she could take those things and escape to faraway places. This also was not a bad idea. Such thoughts quickly flashed through Nun Lu's mind. Su Luo watched Nun Lu's constantly changing expressions, and a hint of sneer appeared in her eyes. An inexperienced, naive idiot. But the expression on Su Luo's face remained unchanged, and when her hand touched the book, she silently mouthed, "Collect." Suddenly, in an instant, the book vanished from the bookshelf. How what happened? Where's the book? Su Luo pretended to be surprised, and with the expression of having lost her head out of fear, she screamed out loud. Nun Lu's whole face had a look of utter disbelief. She had kept a very close eye on it just now, her line of sight never once leaving Su Luo's hand, yet she could only helplessly watch as that book, in an instant, vanished without a trace. What actually happened? The book was fine. How could it just disappear? This time, I must have seen a ghost. Nun Lu could confirm that during such a short time, Su Luo had no chance to pull off any tricks. It was a pity that no matter how much she speculates, she could never have guessed that Su Luo was unexpectedly a space mage, with her body carrying a portable space. That was why Nun Lu's first reaction was to leap to the bookshelf and search for it continuously. At this time, Su Luo was bending over pretending to search for it, but she furtively pulled out the dagger. Seeing that Nun Lu's whole attention was focused on searching through the primeval pill recipes, the corner of Su Luo's mouth lifted into an ice-cold, unrestrained, demonic and sly smile. No sooner said than done. Chapter 98. To search for hidden treasures 4. With a barely perceivable movement of Su Luo's hand, that dagger had already vanished into her sleeves. All of Nun Lu's attention was focused on finding obscure pill recipes, so she did not notice Su Luo's covert movements. Where did it go? Why can't I find it? Su Luo questioned with a puzzled look upon her face, firmly gripping the dagger in her sleeves, as she stealthily approached Nun Lu. Was it because Nun Lu frowned? She was about to turn around, when she noticed a shadow rapidly coming towards her. Nunlu subconsciously tried to block the attack with her hand, tragically causing her right hand to be severed neatly at the wrist. The place of the cut was flat and smooth. Immediately, blood wildly gushed out from the open wound, as if it wasn't vital to Nunlu's life. Aha! Only after seeing the severed hand that had fallen on the ground, did Nunlu finally realize what had happened. She screamed out loud in agony. Su Luo was equally unsatisfied with this result. Originally, Su Luo had a well-thought-out plan. Directly stab Nunlu's heart through her back. With Su Luo's speed and accuracy, it wouldn't be possible for Nunlu to escape death. Still, who would have known that at the last moment Nunlu would manage to retain her life? If Nunlu did an about-face and ran right now, she would merely lose a hand, but would preserve her life. It's a pity that Nunlu was so blinded by her hatred of Su Luo at the moment, so she was itching to make mincemeat out of Su Luo, to appease the hatred in her heart. Consequently, Nunlu didn't even take the time to think before picking up the long sword that had fallen with her dismembered hand, while ignoring the pain she felt. She directly charged at Su Luo with a murderous strike. A cold smirk flashed across Su Luo's eyes. She took out a book from her space and tossed it toward Nunlu with a smile on her face. Catch it. Don't lose it again. Obscure pill recipes? Nunlu's eyes opened wide. She stared with stunned amazement at the obscure pill recipes that appeared in Su Luo's hand from out of nowhere. Her attention was momentarily distracted. However, this short split-second of carelessness was enough for Su Luo. Immediately after she threw the obscure pill recipes in Nunlu's direction, Su Luo had quickly shifted her body and arrived at Nunlu's back like a ghost. While Nunlu's attention was momentarily distracted, like a demon from hell, Su Luo raised the new dagger she had picked up and slashed Nunlu's neck immediately. Blood gushed forth. Nunlu was staring blankly at the obscure pill recipes in her hand. Her nails had whitened because she was ready to explode with rage. However, Nunlu could only watch the unstoppable blood pour out of her neck. She glared at Su Luo with an expression of having suddenly realized something. Space. Mage. Afterwards, with an unreconciled expression, Nunlu fell backwards. Her eyes were wide open with malevolence. Even in death, they wouldn't close due to residual resentment. Su Luo grabbed the obscure pill recipes from Nunlu's clenched fingers, patted off the dust, and was all smiles as she said, "Correct, this young lady is a space mage. It's a pity you only realized it as you were dying. It was too late." At this moment, Su Luo was very thankful for her space. In the beginning, she had felt that it was weak. Now she had slowly discovered its exceptional qualities. After eliminating Nunlu, Su Luo started to look around for treasure. She stood in front of the bookshelf. The shelves were full of advanced pharmacology books, many of which Su Luo couldn't comprehend. However, that didn't matter. She will take all the books back and slowly study them. Su Luo did not grab the books one by one. Instead, she placed the entire bookshelf into her space. Afterwards, Su Luo held her chin and started to circle around Zihua's medicinal cauldron. While circling, she took its measure by looking it up and down. She pondered this medicinal cauldron was nothing special, but why was it so heavy? Yes, it was definitely quite heavy. Su Luo had already tested its weight a moment ago. Chapter 99. To Search for Hidden Treasures 5. Su Luo wanted to shift the medicinal cauldron, but found that no matter how much strength she used, it wouldn't budge. It was as if the thing was rooted to the ground. If others wanted to take away the medicinal cauldron, it would be extremely difficult. Who knew Su Luo would have the greatest treasure for traveling that others would kill for on her body? Su Luo placed her hand on the edge of the medicinal cauldron and murmured, "Collect." Thus, Zihua's medicinal cauldron, weighing over 5,000 kilograms, vanished on the spot. Su Luo extended her senses into her space and became somewhat worried. She discovered that after circling the cave and taking everything, that little 10 square meters of space had been stuffed full, with barely any space left for her to stand in it. How could she do this? That corner still had a pile of black rocks. She had neither an idea of what it was nor its purpose. Since she couldn't pack it, then she would just abandon it. She would wait until she was fated to come back here and collect it in the future. Su Luo thought sadly. Hence, she bent over to pick up a few pieces, planning to find someone to analyze it. After all, it was left behind by Elder Zihua. Something left behind by him. How could it be simple? After throwing exactly 3 rocks into her space, all of a sudden, Su Luo felt a wave of dizziness. It was a pain that she couldn't make heads or tails of it, and that almost knocked her off her feet. But this kind of stinging pain left as quickly as it came. It was gone in the blink of an eye. At this moment, Su Luo checked her space and suddenly, her mouth formed an O shape. Unexpectedly, this was also possible. Su Luo discovered that her space had grown bigger, even though the change was not obvious. However, at the corner her space, it had actually grown by square meter. This kind of discovery made Su Luo ecstatic. The space can actually get larger? Su Luo's gaze fell upon the pile of round black stones. Just now, she had put in the medicinal cauldron, books and other materials, and yet the space did not change. However, after putting in those 3 black little stones, her space changed. Could it be that these rocks were able to increase the size of her space? Whether it was true or not, she could find out by trying again. Su Luo picked up a black rock and threw it in 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces. Whoosh! Suddenly, Su Luo felt her head started to ache. It hurt so much that she broke out in cold sweat. But after she opened her eyes, she found that her space had indeed grown bigger by another square meter. It turned out to be true. This discovery allowed Su Luo to put her heart at ease. Without hesitation, she promptly swept up the remaining 10 or so stones from the ground into her space, sweeping the floor clean. Hence, her space had widened again by another 5 square meters. Su Luo was secretly delighted. If there was an opportunity, she would go search for more of these black stones. At this moment, Su Luo had yet to find out what kind of energy actually resided in these black rocks, and how advantageous they would be to her cultivation in the future. However, just as Su Luo was about to leave, she realized that another person was at the entrance. That person was hugging her sword and reclining against the entrance, lips in a sneer, with eyes as cold as a viper unblinkingly staring at her. Su Luo felt her heart jump, silently bemoaning trouble. Just now, she had recklessly swept up all those treasures in the room. Had it possibly been witnessed by her opponent? Since Su Luo could not sense the other's presence when she arrived, this already proved that that person's martial skills were a lot better than hers. Su Luo, your cheap life still has such great luck in surviving. Huang held her double-edged sword, sneering non-stop as she approached Su Luo. Ever since Huang had lost Su Luo's trail, she had continuously searched. Later, she found traces of a fight at the edge of a cliff. Without another word, she shimmied down the creeper vine and searched en route. Unexpectedly, she had discovered this cave that was a completely different world. However, the most important discovery was of Su Luo's body. Huang would never have imagined that the legendary good-for-nothing was actually a space mage that was considered to be extinct on the continent. 1. A Chinese gene equals 0. 5 kilogram or 1 pounds. Here the author stated 10,000 gene, which then equals 5,000 kilogram. We will be converting all measurements to the International System of Units. Chapter 100 In Enemy Hands 1. Moreover, Su Luo's space wasn't small either. Although apothecaries are rare, weighed against the almost extinct space mages, how could they even compare? If the matter of a space mage appearing was to spread, in all likelihood, wouldn't the entire continent be stirred up by this? Unbelievable. Huang really couldn't have imagined it. This vile girl was actually a space mage. Originally, she wanted to kill Su Luo, but now she couldn't. She believed that the young mistress would be overjoyed to give this slut to the venerable master as an offering. After they had placed Su Luo's mind under their control, she could only helplessly throw her life away in service to the Jade Lake Palace. The more Huang thought about it, the more gleeful she became. Her smile had a sinister measuring look as she step by step walked toward Su Luo. Her hand swung the long sword, aiming its sharp tip straight at Su Luo. Little slut, let's see where you can run to now. Su Luo's thoughts were indeed currently suppressed to the point that she felt she was about to die. During the 5,000-kilometer-long march 1. She had overcome so much and walked so long too. Just when she saw the end of the road, at this final juncture, she was intercepted by the enemy forces. This was truly the story of the praying mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the black-naped oriole bird behind. Moreover, she was the unfortunate hateful praying mantis. Nangong Luoyan had exhorted and warned Su Luo a great number of times before to be cautious and prudent. She must not let the matter of her being a space mage be revealed. Otherwise, her life would be in constant danger. Now Su Luo's greatest hidden trump card had been discovered by the Jade Lake Fairy's maid. If this was to leak out, Su Luo's eyes narrowed slightly. A homicidal determination to obliterate all evidence of her unwitting disclosure appeared in Su Luo's heart. However, her expression remained calm and collected. Icy rays from the depths of Su Luo's eyes shot a quick glance at Huang. What if I don't go with you? Do you really think you have the leeway to choose? Huang condescendingly said while casting disparaging glances at Su Luo. Huang's current situation was like the venerable queen up high, while Su Luo was merely an ant that she could easily trample on. Su Luo was just a lowly ant that completely lacked the strength to fight back. But when Huang's vision landed on Nun Lu's body, that was on the ground with eyes full of unresolved resentment staring sightlessly in death, a trace of shock passed through her eyes. Nun Lu had actually been killed. She and Nun Lu had grown up together. They had practiced martial arts together. So Huang was very familiar with Nun Lu's martial arts abilities and knew it was on par with hers. Never in a million years could she have imagined that Nun Lu would die under the hands of the good-for-nothing Su Luo. Nun Lu really had died with unresolved grievances. Looks like I really underestimated you, slut. Huang cast sidelong glances at Su Luo, gnashing her teeth as her rage burst forth. Huang was itching to finish off Su Luo with one sword strike. Regrettably, she could not kill Su Luo now. Su Luo was this continent's almost extinct space mage. Furthermore, she was also a space mage that did not have any power to protect herself. Huang secretly speculated that if she was to take Su Luo to an auction house and sell her, on the basis of this little slut's innate gift and appearance, shouldn't she be able to sell for an unprecedented sky-high price? It would indeed be a fortune that could tempt a person's heart. Su Luo examined Huang's constantly changing sinister expressions, and also turned her head to look at the corpse of the fallen Nun Lu. A bitter look appeared in Su Luo's eyes. Her secret having been discovered was disastrous. Due to this, Huang would certainly increase her vigilance. Su Luo's small tricks from before could not be used again. With a bitter smile on her face, Su Luo raised both of her hands in surrender. Huang had learned a lesson from Nun Lu's mistake, and as a result had become very cautious. Huang took out a dark red blood-colored rope and tied both of Su Luo's hands behind her back. Huang had bound Su Luo so tightly that the joint looked seamless. Behave. Don't even think about escaping, Huang warned with a stern voice. Su Luo only made a slight movement. When Huang's icy-cold long sword sliced at her neck, a thin thread of blood slowly seeped out of the cut. Su Luo knew that if she resisted, on account of having killed two of the opponent's sister-in-arms, Huang would probably without a second thought either break or cut off her arms and legs. 5,000-kilometer long march written in Chinese was 10,000 li. 2 li equals 1 kilometer. This is a reference to the historical one made by the eventual communist leader Mao Zedong in October of 1934. Before World War II, China had a civil war/internal struggle for power between the Chinese National Party, led by Chiang Kai-shek, and the Chinese Red Army of the Communist Party. Chiang Kai-shek was about to eliminate the Red Army at Jiang, Shi when Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai led the Long March to escape the encirclement. The march was a bitter one that lasted a year, with only 10% of the original troops surviving till the end. 2. The Chinese characters stated 25,000 li equals 125,000 kilometers. I took the figurative meaning here, because the Long March was only 9,000 kilometers. Chapter 101. In Enemy Hands. 2. She definitely didn't want that kind of tragedy to occur to her own body. Since that was the case, all she could do was to wait and see. She was pushed to the front by Huang. While walking slowly, Su Luo's thought process was like electricity. Plan after plan rapidly went through her head, as she thoroughly searched for a way to escape her predicament. She struggled to break free of the ropes that bound her hands behind her back, but sadly found that the red rope actually became even tighter. The rope tightened so much that it practically cut into her flesh. Su Luo sucked in a cold breath and immediately abandoned this method. Tch Huang scoffed. You think it's just an ordinary rope? Truly laughable. That is the restraining spirit rope. Someone who has no spiritual power actually wants to force it open? Dream on. Spirit strength, was it? After her sealed space had been opened, Su Luo was no longer that good for nothing without a bit of spirit power. However, Huang once again opened her mouth and interrupted Su Luo's sweet dreams. Even if you have spirit strength, without knowing the method, then you are only trying to no avail. Su Luo suddenly became frustrated. Alright, this method could also not be used. While walking, Su Luo pretended to trip over her own feet and fell to the ground, with her back against the wall. In an instant, she pulled out the new dagger from her space to cut the rope. To her displeasure, she discovered that the rope couldn't be cut. Okay then, she had to think of other ways. Huang with a sneer looked at her. Stop trying, you can't escape. Obediently come with me to the Jade Lake Palace. Even though you know that I'm a space mage, you still use this method to invite me? You're not afraid that I'll blacken your name in front of your master? Su Luo tried to use words to divert her attention. Blacken my name? You really think that you're a notable person? Huang laughed mockingly, casting a sidelong glance at Su Luo, with a face full of disdain. Could it be that you don't know that there is a magical technique called control intentions? It can directly control the human mind, making people into walking corpses. Do you really think that after you arrive at the Jade Lake Palace, you are able to choose? Control intentions? Like walking corpses? Su Luo's heart was palpitating with fear. On the surface, Su Luo kept a wronged and lonely expression, but in her heart, she was secretly coming up with ideas. This Jade Lake's fairy's maid must be killed before she meets up with the Jade Lake's fairy. Su Luo absolutely could not let Huang leak out her secret, or else her life in the future would not be peaceful. They eventually reached the end of the long secluded tunnel, and they had already walked past the long winding underground river. Although Su Luo had racked her brain, she still had not thought of an escape plan. She could not help but be secretly anxious. Now speaking of the Jade Lake Fairy's side, at the side of Nangong Luyan, there currently stood the figure of a tall man dressed in black clothing. His entire body was wrapped in a black robe. He was standing rigidly straight, giving people a cold and harsh kind of feeling. Nangong Luyan received him. His gaze was devilishly charming and ruthless, revealing an ice-cold majestic light. Are they all present? Yes. The black-clothed man was very respectful. 3,000 members of the Tiger Wolf Regiment have all been gathered, awaiting your highness's command. Search the Sunset Mountain range with full force. You must find her. Nangong Luyan's face was a bit pale. Underneath his seemingly unperturbed eyes was concealed a hawk-like penetrating sharp edge. His body was covered in a solemn and murderous aura. If you can't find her, then there's no need to return to this king. Yes, sir. The black-clothed man's straight and tall body bent down in a bow. He paid his respects and then turned around. He lifted his hands. Immediately 3,000 people, shrouded in black robes, split into groups of 10, scattering in all directions to search. Standing nearby, the Jade Lake's fairy had her fists clenched, looking at Nangong Luyan once again speaking his desires. Her serene and undisturbed face had a trace of fury that was difficult to conceal. She never would have thought that Nangong Luyan would actually send the Tiger Wolf Regiment into the Sunset Mountain Range. Chapter 102. In Enemy Hands 3. Others would not know, but she knew. The lowest level in the Tiger Wolf Regiment was at the 3rd rank. Their average strength was at 4th rank. With such a strong team entering the forest, she hoped that Qin Ning had already killed that slut and destroyed both the corpse and the evidence. Otherwise, this affair would become problematic. Even more infuriating to the Jade Lake Fairy was that this Tiger Wolf Regiment had been secretly trained with painstaking effort, personally by Nangong Luyan. These were his secret troops and one of his greatest trump cards. She had never thought that Nangong Luoyan, because of Su Luo, would reveal these troops. This spoke volumes of Su Luo's position in his heart. This discovery almost made Jade Lake Fairy grind her teeth to dust. Third senior brother, is there a need to launch such a large campaign? Maybe Qin Ning has already found Su Luo. After all, the Tiger Wolf Regiment is formed from 5 years of your blood and sweat. Jade Lake Fairy had a perfect smile, similar to a warm summer breeze. Nangong Luoyan's pair of beautiful eyes were bright as stars, his face pallid yet resolute. If the Tiger Wolf Regiment can be exchanged for Luo girl's safety, don't mention one troop, even if it's all of them in the regiment, why would I be unwilling to part with them? As long as his Luo girl was safe, regardless of the price, he would pay it. A malicious expression flashed across Jade Lake Fairy's eyes. She was only nearly able to continue maintaining her gently smiling face, except for a slight stiffening at the corners of her lips. However, Nangong Luoyan was no longer looking at her. He had closed his eyes and started to heal his injuries through cultivation. He had to quickly recover his strength. His Luo girl was still waiting for him. Speaking of Su Luo's side, she still did not know that Nangong Luoyan had already sent men out searching for her. Being escorted by Heir Huang like a criminal, Su Luo did her best to stall for time en route. But eventually, she still needed to face the inevitable conclusion. Seeing that they would be reaching that 1,000-year-old ancient tree in another hour, Su Luo's heart grew extremely anxious. She guessed that the Jade Lake Fairy would be at that 1,000-year-old ancient tree. If Su Luo waited until she was in the Jade Lake Fairy's grasp, the situation she faced would be far different from the present. By then, it would be even harder to escape. Su Luo's heart was secretly worried. Suddenly, just past the mountain peak, Heir Huang's footsteps stopped. Her eyes coldly gazed at Su Luo, sneering. "Damnable girl, with your eyes circling around, still thinking to escape?" Su Luo smiled sweetly and bluntly replied, "Haven't you heard it before? Fugitives who don't want to run aren't good fugitives." "Oh, then you must be really disappointed." Heir Huang raised the back of her blade and gestured at herself. "What are you going to do?" Su Luo's heart had a faint sense of dread. "You're not thinking about alarming everyone by shouting when we are near the camp, with the notion of attracting His Highness Prince Jin's attention, right? Say, how can I possibly give you such a chance?" Heir Huang laughed treacherously. "So Miss Su, I will just have to work a little harder and carry you back." "Hey, I'm very heavy." Su Luo panicked. "No problem, I can carry you." Heir Huang laughed shadily with a measuring look. With her words barely finished, Heir Huang struck without warning towards the back of Su Luo's neck with the blunt side of her blade. If she were to be knocked out, she would really become fish meat on the chopping board, to be taken advantage of. Su Luo started to panic in her anxiety, but she could not come up with any solution. Presently, both her hands were bound by a red rope made of an unknown material, with the slightest movement causing it to constrict even tighter. By now, it had already cut into her flesh. If she moved again, it would probably slice off her hand. Extreme anxiety filled Su Luo's heart, yet there was nothing she could do. However, the goddess of fortune had always stood on Su Luo's side. Even though she let Su Luo experience numerous catastrophes, even being hunted down by countless people, she would always deliver a pleasant surprise at the very last moment. Just like right now. Chapter 103, Shaken to the Core 1. Just at the crucial moment when Heir Huang's sword was about to cut into Su Luo's back, suddenly, the vast silhouette of a divine beast emerged from behind Heir Huang. Abruptly, a black whirlwind arrived. Immediately, the sandstorm left pebbles in its path, and dust covered the sky. A desolate and harsh aura rapidly spread in all directions. Even the night had gained a savage, bloody atmosphere. A familiar omen, an ominous premonition. Su Luo turned around and ran. "You still want to run?" Heir Huang let out a cold laugh, raising the sword and stabbed towards Su Luo's back. Su Luo's heart was extremely anxious. Heir Huang was enough trouble. Why had the venerable divine dragon also came back to join the action? Didn't she and her treasured son already return home? This situation was really that when it rains, it pours. All the misfortune had been encountered by her. Su Luo felt her heart crying out that it was unfair. Air Huang's sword fiercely struck out, however. The moment it came within 12 centimeters, of Su Luo, it stopped. The sword tip sat there frozen in midair, unable to advance even another centimeter forward. Moreover, in this life, Air Huang would never be able to advance forward a single centimeter more. It was because at this moment, her body seemed to be held in place. Her entire body was stiff as iron, standing there like an ice sculpture. Her jaw could not stop shuddering, cold sweat pouring down her forehead. She seemed to be enduring a great deal of pain. Suddenly only the sound of a loud boom could be heard. Su Luo used all her strength to throw her entire body forward, protecting her head and firmly lying on her stomach on the ground. It was only after the noise had ended that she had unsteadily stood up and looked back. With this one look, even she, who had seen countless bloody scenes, could not help but be speechless. Air Huang's entire body had exploded. Her limbs were scattered all around, and blood was splattered all over the place. The flesh on her body was charred to a crisp. Even her skeleton had almost turned into powder. The ground was drenched in blood, marked with smears of guts and gore. This was a scene that could make anyone seeing it to throw up. Su Luo turned around and wanted to run, but the divine dragon had already appeared in front of her. Facing the divine dragon's pair of ice-cold eyes that were like an ancient abyss, Su Luo's heart involuntarily trembled. A chill that she had never felt before slowly rose from the soles of her feet to the rest of her body, to her limbs and through her bones. She even felt that her back was trembling. Just now, Air Huang's body exploding was clearly the divine dragon's handiwork. It only had to wave a claw, and Air Huang had exploded tragically, not even leaving behind a skeleton. Thinking about how from the start she had kidnapped its treasured son, Su Luo felt her forehead covered with cold sweat. All of a sudden, the enormous divine dragon in front of her changed shape. Before Su Luo's eyes, unexpectedly appeared the uttermost beautiful and handsomest man. A head of silvery, snow-white hair that poured down in torrents, lightly and wantonly dancing in the wind. It curved lovingly, and was inseparable from that beautiful face, poetic and picturesque like a painting. A noble and stern face, with an expression clearly written in 4 characters. I alone am supreme. This person. Could this be the venerable divine dragon that was chasing her and trying to kill her earlier? Actually, it was not a dragon mother, but a dragon father? Su Luo felt as if her throat was being choked, unable to say a word. Insignificant human. The venerable divine dragon's phoenix eyes narrowed. A murderous aura flashed from the depth of his eyes. Su Luo had all along kept a close watch on the eyes of the venerable divine dragon. Upon seeing the murderous intent, without having to think, she immediately dropped down in a protective posture and rolled into a big hole beside her. 1 CUN equals 3. 715 centimeters or 1.46 inches. It measures the width of a person's thumb at the knuckle. Here the author used 3 CUN, so about 12 centimeters. Chapter 104. Shaken to the core 2. Surrounded by deafening noise, Su Luo felt a murderous air sailing over her head in passing. Half of her head peeked out from within the hole. Su Luo was astonished when her eyes met with the venerable divine dragon's icy cold eyes. After one deadly attack by him, she was miraculously still alive. The venerable divine dragon frowned in displeasure. Shameless human, you dare to rob me of my son? Since the silly little dragon was not around, with a wave of the venerable divine dragon's hand, her life would end. Su Luo glanced at what little remained of Air Huang's body. She nervously swallowed and changed her expression to a flattering smile. Her starry eyes looked at the divine beast, silently made a solemn vow, and clenched her fist. Your venerable divine dragon, sir. That was a misunderstanding, a complete misunderstanding. It was absolutely not what you think. I certainly had no intention of kidnapping the little dragon from your eminence. Su Luo was determined to never divulge the truth about what happened. The consequences of admitting her guilt came down to one word: death. The highest level of deceit is not to fool another, but to fool even yourself. Su Luo made a fist. She was going to lie at a level approaching the celestial realm. The venerable divine dragon lowered his eyes, sweeping her with a look of disdain. I'll give you a chance to explain. The next few words would determine whether she would live or die. She hurriedly inverted right from wrong in her mind and began to speak. In summary, the story was that in order to let the divine dragon concentrate on defeating the phoenix, she had taken away the little divine dragon to protect him. Finally, Su Luo said wholeheartedly, "In the end, the little divine dragon was returned to you without a single hair harmed on his head." The venerable divine dragon's cold eyes were filled with deadly stillness. He disdainfully glanced at Su Luo. "Despicable human, you dared to make an equal contract with my son." Divine dragons were very distinguished while despicable humans were insignificant. Yet both sides had entered into a contract of equals. How could the venerable divine dragon accept this? At this time, the venerable divine dragon had one hand behind his back. From within his sleeve, something small began to move. A small provocative head poked out, as if desiring to get out. However, with just a pat by the venerable divine dragon, it became confused and disoriented, thus tumbling back into the sleeve. Su Luo began to cry inside her heart. If she said that it was the little divine dragon who had initiated the contract, she speculated that the venerable divine dragon would definitely kill her with one slap. However, the venerable divine dragon might not know all of the facts of the matter. Su Luo wiped her sweat. She could only try to divert the venerable divine dragon's attention. Su Luo pointed to Er Huang's mutilated body with a look of indignation. "The venerable divine dragon. When this shameless disciple saw me holding the little dragon before, she tried to force me to surrender the little dragon. She tied me up, the results of which you can clearly see. When I told her that the little divine dragon had to be returned to you, she attempted to kill me to vent her anger. Fortunately, we encountered you, the venerable divine dragon. Your eminence descended like the immortal god of justice. Your prestige and might are as vast as the oceans. Your mighty dragon appearance is formidable. The venerable divine dragon had the kindness to save me. I will engrave it into my heart. Even if I were to die 10,000 times, I won't speak of this." The venerable divine dragon let out a humph sound, lifted his chin, and knotted his brows. Graceful words, definitely the flowery speech of humans. Su Luo silently thought. You knew that the words were elegant but insincere, yet weren't you very pleased to hear it? The venerable divine dragon looked at the shattered pieces of the corpse, and also looked at Su Luo's thin and weak body. His brows once again wrinkled. Incapable human, even such a tiny ant dared to take unfair advantage of you. Okay, Su Luo conceded. This venerable divine dragon was very literate and accomplished. Every word was full of condescending sarcasm. Despicable human, shameless human, incapable human. XX, human. The space before human could be filled with a million derogatory words according to his whim. It actually should not be too surprising. Confronting the human race, the dragon race had a natural superiority complex. The dragon population grew very slowly. However, each baby dragon that was born had outstanding innate talent. Even if they did not cultivate while maturing and just spent time eating and sleeping, they can still stand shoulder to shoulder with the strongest humans. However, the ant that the venerable divine dragon referred to as Er Huang, right? Su Luo defended herself. That was because earlier my spiritual power was sealed. Of course I wouldn't be able to beat her. Once I've learned some magical techniques, naturally I will be far better than her. Chapter 105. Shaken to the Core 3. Suddenly, a slender hand was placed on Su Luo's head. Was he about to sweat her dead? While Su Luo was at a loss, a sudden burst of throbbing pain rushed through her head. With just a moment's effort, the venerable divine dragon withdrew his hand and reluctantly expressed his satisfaction. The dragon ring actually recognized you, a shallow, crippled human, as its owner. What a waste. First, excluding whether she was shallow or not, but a cripple. The corner of Su Luo's mouth twitched. Fine. This world was one where strength ruled. Whatever the person with the hardest fist said was the truth. Just when she was in the midst of being depressed, she felt the restraining spirit rope binding her loosen. Once more, she raised her head and saw that the restraining spirit rope, which was in the venerable divine dragon's hand, had been reduced to fine powder. really worthy of being called the mighty and powerful venerable divine dragon. Just as Su Luo was sighing ruefully, she suddenly saw a dark shadow being thrown towards her arms, which she subconsciously caught. Awoo. The adorable little dragon looked up at her with his cute little face. His large watery and clear eyes looked at Su Luo with a grieved expression. Su Luo was confused by the venerable divine dragon's action. Why would he throw his family's treasured son to her? Didn't he spend a great deal of effort chasing after the little dragon before recovering him? Take good care of him. The venerable divine dragon frowned. Subsequently, he tossed a jade piece at her in a haughty and dismissive manner. What is this? Su Luo carefully sized up that white piece of jade. It was smooth and glossy like crystallized amber. Her beautiful eyes observed the amber alertly with a very perplexed expression. Could the divine dragon really be this nice? He actually gave her something? Ignorant human. The venerable divine dragon's lowered eyebrows expressed his dissatisfaction, both hands tucked behind his back. In a rare moment, he made a lengthy statement. Contained inside the jade piece is my spirit strength, condensed into a virtual image of me. In case little Meng encounters danger, after you crush the jade, this virtual image will come out to help. The venerable divine dragon's virtual image formed from his spirit strength? Since his venerableness was so confident in himself, then it would be very powerful, right? Then from now on, this piece of jade can only be used once. The venerable divine dragon lifted an eyebrow and shot her an indifferent glance. Inside, there is a manual of dimensional imprint instructions. Whether you can learn it all depends on your ability and luck. Su Luo was dumbfounded. In other words, if she still hasn't finished learning the dimensional imprint, when she crushes this piece of jade, that could save her life only once, then wouldn't she be unable to learn dimensional imprint later? This was indeed a difficult choice to make. Seeing Su Luo's confused and conflicted appearance, the venerable divine dragon was extremely pleased. He used his absolute superiority as an advantage to look down on her and apathetically said, "If my son has an accident, you will die." The venerable divine dragon gave the adorable little dragon a glare that conveyed the feeling of hating the iron for not becoming steel. However, the adorable little dragon took no note of it, as he flashed his huge limpid and bright eyes at Su Luo. His pair of paws tenaciously grabbed onto Su Luo's sleeves and refused to let go. Not waiting for Su Luo to respond, the venerable divine dragon used a little strength to rub the adorable little dragon's head. He decisively flung his sleeves. His tall figure then vanished without a trace. After the venerable divine dragon disappeared, golden rays of light flashed from the adorable little dragon's body. While Su Luo was looking on, the adorable little dragon's body unexpectedly underwent a huge change. The originally fang-bearing and claw-brandishing young dragon had turned into a cute, lovable puppy. Furthermore, his body was enshrouded in white velvety fur that meekly drooped to the ground. This type of whole-body transformation caused Su Luo to be completely dumbfounded. The little dragon had actually turned into a puppy? However, this way was also good. Su Luo had originally been worried that after taking the little dragon into human society, with her current strength, she would not be able to protect him. Now that the venerable divine dragon had turned him into a puppy, this relieved her of countless burdens. It seemed that although the venerable divine dragon looked indifferent and heartless, he had thought over this situation very thoroughly and meticulously. Ahoo. The adorable little dragon squirmed around in Su Luo's embrace, like a little piglet. You little hot potato, alas. Su Luo glared at the little thing in front of her, and used her slender fingers to poke his head. Chapter 106, Shaken to the Core 4. Recalling the venerable divine dragon's warning, Su Luo just wanted to spit out blood. Now, her life was inseparably linked with the adorable little dragon's. If the adorable little dragon was harmed in any way, then she would lose her life. Su Luo became aware of her body's fatigue and the grumbling sounds coming from her own stomach. After a restless night of being chased by people intent on killing her, Su Luo was so famished that her rib cage was almost visible. She placed the adorable little dragon on the ground, letting it run around and play. Su Luo took out the magical beast eggs left over from yesterday's meal. She dug a pit, placed the eggs inside and covered them. Then she used a small fire to slowly bake the eggs. Having finished setting everything up, Su Luo now had time to check up on the adorable little dragon. After seeing the adorable little dragon's actions, Su Luo had a strong urge to throw her hands in the air or slap her own forehead in mortification. Couldn't this little guy play with anything else? It had actually decided to go and chase after butterflies. If the adorable little dragon was simply chasing after butterflies, then that wouldn't be a problem. However, the way the little guy went about it was anything but ordinary. Its thin little legs wobbled and swayed as it bounced after the butterfly. Seeing that the butterfly was about to fly out of its line of sight, a mouthful of dragon's breath containing fire puffed out. Immediately, the pitiful butterfly was reduced to ashes and blown away. But the little guy didn't seem to understand what had happened. The adorable little dragon looked in all directions, searching for the butterfly that had already been toasted by his dragon's breath. The little guy looked until he became quite desperate, but still couldn't find the butterfly. Consequently, the adorable little dragon's pair of huge, limpid and bright eyes contained a pitiful expression. It ran with trembling and staggering steps into Su Luo's embrace to complain. Su Luo didn't even have enough energy to scold the little dragon. She could only extend 2 fingers and poke its head without much strength, while saying only 3 words. "You little idiot. Wasn't it said that when baby dragons were hatched, their minds already contained inherited knowledge? Weren't they supposed to be very intelligent, full of wisdom and foresight? Why was it that her contracted little divine dragon seemed like an ignorant infant that hasn't even been weaned yet?" A gloomy thought appeared in Su Luo's mind. Could it be that this little guy's intellect was so low that his dragon father wasn't being generous when abandoning him in her care? The little guy was unaware of the doubts going through his new owner's head. At this moment, his little paws had dug out a magical beast's egg that was bigger than his head. The little dragon simply opened its mouth wide and swallowed the entire egg in one mouthful. By the time Su Luo noticed this, it was already too late. "My morning meal." 3 lines of veins burst out from Su Luo's forehead. Whimper, whimper. The adorable little dragon's pair of huge eyes had a bewildered and lost expression as it looked at Su Luo. His little tongue was still licking its lips while the little dragon grumbled in Su Luo's head. "Hungry, eat." Su Luo recalled the venerable divine dragon's decree. Her heart suddenly felt guilty, as if she had committed a crime. After all, the venerable divine dragon had given her a piece of jade as payment for raising this little guy. How could she let his son go hungry? Su Luo very quickly hunted down a rabbit and brought it back. After skinning and washing the rabbit clean, she stuffed its abdominal cavity with red root gromwell and other types of flavoring herbs. She also rubbed a layer of cumin on the rabbit's skin before finally piercing it with a twig, so she could slowly roast it over the fire. While Su Luo was roasting the rabbit, she was also instructing the adorable little dragon. "Be good and wait a little bit. It will be ready to eat soon." "Awo awo." Little Meng Meng in a human-like manner sat on Su Luo's lap. Both of his little paws was placed on each side of its chin, sniffing the fragrant scent of barbecuing meat and watching the meat making sizzling sounds. Its pair of star-like eyes were filled with great anticipation and expectation. "Oh, almost ready." Su Luo watched the oil sizzling on the roasting rabbit with a very good mood. "Awo awo." A silvery line of saliva hung at the corner of little Meng Meng's mouth. The smell was very appetizing. The little dragon really wanted to eat the meat. Suddenly, little Meng Meng's nose began to itch. It became more and more itchy. Achoo! A stream of dragon's breath puffed out without warning. Chapter 107. Shaken to the Core 5. 3 fireballs shot towards the delicious-smelling roasting rabbit. And in a split second, that shiny brown roasting rabbit was turned into a black ashy lump. The roasting twig holding up the rabbit broke. A snap sound rang out. That black ashy lump dropped to the ground, disintegrating into fine powder, which then scattered to the wind. The veins on Su Luo's hands bulged. Little Meng Meng's face seemed dumbfounded. Not waiting for Su Luo to exert her authority as the owner, little Meng Meng had already rolled to the ground and started to wail. "Awu awu." He looked heartbreakingly at the powderized rabbit. Crocodile tears flowed down and misted over his eyes. He turned his head around, and in a very wronged and innocent manner, stared at her accusingly. Su Luo. Why did it seem as if she was the one who did something wrong? Just when Su Luo was still speechless, suddenly, she felt the danger of a human's presence. She picked up little Meng Meng and turned around to run, but found that it was already too late. She didn't know when it had happened, but now, all around her was a troop of 10 people, who tightly surrounded her. Every member in this troop had their entire body shrouded by a black cloak. It was impossible to see their features clearly. They had a cruel and bloodthirsty aura that gave off a cold and detached impression to people. Could it be that the Jade Lake's fairy had again sent people to murder her? Hugging little Meng Meng to her, Su Luo's heart secretly cried out bitterly. Previously, those people had come at her separately, so she could still use her wits to bravely fight each opponent one by one. But now, she was suddenly swarmed by about 10 people. It would be difficult for her 2 fists to withstand their 4 legs. Just as a bitter expression started to take over Su Luo's face, suddenly, the leader of those people, with his deep cold voice, issued out. Could your distinguished self be Miss Su? Su Luo suspected even more that these people were sent by the Jade Lake's fairy. Able to send out such a team, among the prominent people she had offended, other than the Jade Lake's fairy. Who else was there? Could she deny this? Very clearly she could not. This was because the leader of these person actually took out a picture scroll from within his chest area. He looked back and forth, comparing Su Luo to the image on the picture scroll. Finally, he rolled up the picture scroll and placed it back. His pair of dark, solemn eyes looked toward Su Luo without a trace of warmth. Come with us. They weren't going to kill her on the spot? Su Luo's heart was secretly on guard. Rationally speaking, Heir Huang had already died, so the Jade Lake Palace's people wouldn't know her secret now. Thus they had no reason to leave her alive. Could it be they weren't people sent by the Jade Lake's fairy? Then who could that person who sent them be? Su Luo's heart become more alert. She softly asked. Who sent you guys? They actually had a picture scroll. No comment. Responded the leader of the group of people, whose indifference was like an azura that came from hell. His appearance was of a person who had lived for a long time in the dark shadows, giving off a brooding, bloodthirsty, icy aura. Other people might view this type of person with mind-numbing fear. However, Su Luo had also lived in that dark world as a gold medal level assassin in her previous world. Thus, she knew this feeling well, and it gave her a feeling of familiarity and comfort. Okay, I'll go with you. Since resistance was futile, she could only go with them. Although Su Luo's expression was indifferent, her heart had relaxed some. The 10 people surrounded her, with her in the center, so as to keep a close watch over her, while also protecting her. Even though she felt a bloodthirsty, cold atmosphere from their bodies. That was their aura from having resided in the dark world for a long time. Not a killing intent aimed at her. At this time, hiding behind an ancient tree was Qin Ning, who was so angry that she nearly spit out blood. She had followed the tracks looking for Su Luo, but what she couldn't believe was that along the way, she could only find Cui Yu and Heir Huang's corpses. In all likelihood, Nun Lu had probably ended up in the same disastrous state, while that Su Luo was actually safe and secure. She was even so carefree as to leisurely roast a rabbit. This discovery caused Qin Ning to almost grind her teeth into dust. Qin Ning didn't know that those 10 people in black robes were His Highness Prince Jin's secret troops. However, she had a hunch that if Su Luo was taken away by them, information about young mistress wanting to kill Su Luo would be divulged. Then this matter could definitely affect the feelings and trust between the young mistress and Prince Jin. Therefore this time Su Luo had to die. Qin Ning was concealed within the lush leaves on top of the ancient tree, her arms pulling the string of a bent bough. A sharp feathered arrow emitted a dim radiance in the dark night. Chapter 108. Life and Death at Stake. 1. Suddenly, a whoosh sound erupted as a meteor-like arrow flew towards Su Luo's throat. Qin Ning held a cruel sneer at the corners of her lips. Her eyes glowed with a vicious, malicious light as the bow in her hands continuously launched arrows non-stop. The whoosh 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 sounds were endless as cold arrows flew out. Watch out! Among the bodyguards protecting Su Luo, the black-robed leader was the first to notice an anomaly in the air and loudly raised the alarm before heading in front of Su Luo to block the arrow. When it came to weapons, Qin Ning's expertise was in using the bow and arrow. Her archery skills came from having been personally taught by the archery god Elder Shou Wu. Vicious and bold, the archery technique was awe-inspiring. The strength displayed with the bow made it seem as if the wielder could launch a powerful arrow that would even pierce the sky. If it was a direct confrontation, Qin Ning might lose. However, when it came to sniping using icy arrows, she definitely had cause to be proud. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. 9 stars shot in succession, 9 arrows bursting with a sinister lethal aura. 10 black-robed men surrounded Su Luo, putting her in the center. Their weapons were deployed vigorously, and their skillful movements were quick like the wind. They had enclosed Su Luo completely. Their protection was flawless. These people. Su Luo's eyes held a flash of doubt. Looking at their battle formation, their priority clearly was to protect her, even if they had to sacrifice their own lives. But why? Who would sacrifice these strong killers for her protection? Su Luo's heart blazed with heavy suspicion. Earlier, when the black-robed men had located Su Luo, they had released a burst of blue fireworks into the sky. When the signal sounded, Nangong Luyan was at the most crucial moment of his healing regimen, yet he decisively forced himself to cease the process. Suddenly, Nangong Luyan opened his eyes, revealing an expression of profound fondness in their depths. Nangong Luyan's personal bodyguard Ling Feng stood nearby. With both hands holding his sword to his chest, Ling Feng was vigilantly observing their surroundings in a state of readiness. Nangong Luyan suddenly stood. His hawk-like eyes gazed sharply at Ling Feng, and with eyes full of elation asked, "They've found her." Ling Feng worriedly looked at Nangong Luyan. "Please rest easy, Your Highness." The 11th group sent back the signal, stating that they have already found Miss Su, and that she is safe and sound. She does not seem to be injured. Nangong Liuyun's demonically magnificent lips that were as red as blood suddenly spread into a perfect smile so incomparably alluring that it could charm all living things. Ling Feng could only look on as Nangong Luyan laughed heartily. "Good. Very good. I knew that Luo girl would be fine. Cough cough cough." He loudly coughed, then covered his chest, forcibly suppressing his roiling qi and blood before resolutely ordering, "Lead the way." Ling Feng worriedly glanced at Nangong Liuyun's wound and hesitatingly said, "Master, Group 11 is currently escorting Miss Su here. Moreover, the remaining groups are on their way to meet up with Group 11. How about?" Nangong Liuyun's gaze turned malicious and bloodthirsty. His cold anger flared, and a thick layer of ice encased Nangong Liuyun's chiseled face. He dispassionately glared at Ling Feng. "Lead the way." But, considering that His Highness had injured his internal organs by forcibly stopping the recovery process, he really should not be moving about. Besides, Miss Su has already been found and was on her way here. Ling Feng did not understand what the rush was. Nangong Liuyun's eyes exhibited a strong tyrannical air. From head to toe he was encased in a layer of frost that isolated him from the rest of the world. He raised his sleeve. A critical palm strike lashed out, and Ling Feng's body abruptly flew backwards. By the time Ling Feng managed to come to a stop and crawl up to a kneeling position, a trail of fresh blood was flowing down from the corner of his mouth. "Lead the way." Nangong Liuyun's body emitted an intense chill. Cold as ice, his entire person resembled a destructive, ruthless glacier. Ling Feng covered the painful gash. He reluctantly but solemnly nodded before staggering up and heading forward, taking the lead. Chapter 109, Life and Death at Stake 2. Third Senior Brother. The Jade Lake Fairy's footsteps were lithe and graceful, like that of the immortal fairy Ling Bo 1. She floated to Nangong Liuyun's side. She stood there with an elegant and graceful posture. Her beautiful calm face had a touch of concern. Her beautiful eyes were clouded like liquid mist. They appeared to silently gaze at Nangong Liuyun with traces of pity. Nangong Liuyun's red lips slowly lifted. His deep glittering eyes were shining like the lively colorful rays of sunlight. "Luo was found. I'll go bring her back right now." Jade Lake Fairy's hands, which were hidden within her sleeves, clenched into fists. She was barely able to maintain the perfect smile on her face. He would rather hurt himself and forcefully stop the recovery process to go look for her. He would rather injure his personal bodyguard, who had been with him for more than 10 years, in order to go look for her. Third senior brother, if that Miss Su knew of your current situation, she would certainly not blame you. It's better if you remained behind to recuperate from your injuries. However, before the Jade Lake Fairy could finish speaking, Nangong Luyan had brushed her aside and left with staggered large steps. He left her with only these vague words. Wait for us to come back. Wait for us to come back. It was not, wait for me to come back. Behind him, the veins of the Jade Lake Fairy's pair of slender hands suddenly burst out. Her matchless beautiful face became extremely hideous and distorted, and her eyes shone with a vicious insanity. Why was that little slut still not dead? She had even been found by the Tiger Wolf Regiment. The otherworldly Jade Lake Fairy punched the 10,000-year-old ancient tree beside her, and the ancient tree immediately turned into dust. How in the world did Qi Ning not accomplish such a task? She couldn't even kill a good-for-nothing, who was without a touch of spirit strength. What a piece of trash. They were all useless garbage. No, she couldn't let third senior brother find Su Luo before her. The Jade Lake Fairy's eyes flashed with malicious light. She brandished her long sleeves and flew towards that direction. Speaking of Nangong Luyan, when he saw Su Luo's silhouette once again, at that instant, he experienced a change like going from heaven to hell. His Luo girl was really alright. She stood there with her entire body unharmed. At first he was ecstatic, but almost at the same time, his heart dropped back down into hell again. This was because from a long distance away, he saw an arrow containing the inexhaustible power of heaven and earth tearing through space, flying ruthlessly towards Su Luo's heart. The arrow approached with the momentum of a torrential rush, extremely accurate and impossible to avoid. The person who shot the arrow had at least the strength of a 5th rank. In a split second, Nangong Luyan's heart almost leaped out of his throat. Both of his eyes started to smolder like a red-hot flat iron. The temples on both sides of his head violently throbbed. His complexion hazed over with an oppressiveness that was on the fringe of almost devouring people. He was simply too far away, basically, the water from afar that couldn't be used to quench the fire. Fortunately, at the last second, a black-robed killer saw the threat, and without the slightest hesitation, he stood ramrod straight in front of Su Luo to shield her. Only now did Nangong Luyan relax his breath. But abruptly, he felt the accumulated power of heaven and earth coming from that darting arrow. He had a very bad feeling. Sure enough, that flying arrow actually went through the black-robed killer's body, piercing through like hot knife through butter. It then proceeded towards Su Luo's heart again. What was freakishly strange was that the speed and strength of the arrow was unabated. Nangong Luyan's facial muscles violently fluctuated up and down. There was a frighteningly bleak expression on his face. Su Luo's view was blocked by the black-robed man. His back was also very close to her. Therefore she did not discover the still approaching arrow. When she found out, it was already too late to evade it. The arrow darted with extraordinary sharpness, with the sound whistling through the wind, thrusting firmly towards Su Luo's heart. However, when it was a hand-width too, away from Su Luo's heart, all of a sudden, something unimaginable and unbelievable occurred, leading to a huge reversal. Just when everyone was about to witness Su Luo meeting a tragic and a huge occurrence took place. Chapter 110 Life and Death at Stake 3. A deranged, malicious light flashed within the eyes of the Jade Lake's Fairy. Everyone could only stare as the puppy covered in pure snow-white fur sitting on Su Luo's shoulder, playing with her finger, casually extended a little paw. And it actually effortlessly, firmly caught that bizarre changing arrow. It should be said that this arrow contained the might of heaven and earth. Its strength was so great that it would pass through a body without losing momentum. Even Su Luo would not be able to avoid it. However, this type of arrow was actually caught by a puppy. Furthermore, he had grabbed it so effortlessly, making it seem as if he casually caught the arrow in passing. What kind of a situation was this? Practically everyone present had their eyes wide open in disbelief. They were all dumbstruck, stupidly staring at little Meng Meng without blinking. Little Meng Meng's action could be said to have made everyone's jaw drop. With a pair of large misty eyes, Meng Meng adorably sat on top of Su Luo's shoulder. His two little legs were crossed with his two little paws holding the arrow on both ends. Like eating a stalk of sugar cane. Crunch, 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 bite after bite. He gnawed on the arrow as if it was incredibly delicious. Momentarily, everyone was stunned and in shock. The arrow had been made from extracted ancient black iron ore. It was classified as a top-grade weapon, incomparably hard and durable. Ordinary swords were simply incapable of even scratching it. However, this puppy, he had almost completely gnawed through all of it. Furthermore, he was chewing with such delight, as if it was the most delicious food in the world. At this point, other than feeling that it was hard to believe what was happening in front of their eyes, the people present could only remain speechless. What kind of teeth were those? Chewing so hard that crunch crunch sounds resulted? Even just watching this scene made their teeth feel sore on the puppy's behalf. It was only at this moment that little Meng Meng noticed that he had become the focus of everyone's attention. Meng Meng was still holding the half-eaten arrow in his paws, and had a mouthful of iron that had yet to be swallowed. With such a ridiculous appearance, he returned everyone's gaze. Suddenly, Meng Meng seemed to have come to his senses. He quickly discarded the arrow and very bashfully threw himself into Su Luo's arms. Meng Meng covered his little face with his two little paws, and very shyly tucked himself into her embrace. Su Luo felt the corner of her mouth twitch as 3 black lines appeared on her forehead. She had a strong urge to grab the little guy's ear and scold him. Please, where is your domineering attitude? Why don't you display some of that legendary dragon race's autocratic demeanor? Even though your dragon father changed your outer appearance to that of a puppy, but inside you are still a dragon, okay? Furthermore, in your veins runs the blood of the mighty and awe-inspiring divine dragon. How can you give off such a bashful manner? You are destroying the dignity of your dragon race, don't you think? Su Luo, with 3 black lines on her forehead, speechlessly patted the little thing that was squirming around in her embrace. Why did she suddenly have the feeling that she had become a mother? Would this end well? While Su Luo and little Meng Meng were having their silent exchange, Nangong Luoyan had already taken large strides to stand in front of Su Luo. Su Luo looked at Nangong Luoyan, and the corner of her mouth slowly curved up into an ironic smile. Without any hesitation, she turned around and walked away. However, not allowing Su Luo to take a single step, Nangong Luoyan's figure flashed and quick as lightning seized her wrist. His hand was as cold as ice. Su Luo started to fiercely struggle free. However, no matter how hard she struggled, Nangong Luoyan's hold was like an iron clamp, rock firm and unyielding. She was completely unable to shake it off. In contrast, Nangong Luoyan only stared attentively at Su Luo. His pearly eyes were as deep and pitch black as a lake. Centimeter by centimeter, he scanned Su Luo all over, looking at every pore on her body in an extremely careful and serious manner. Su Luo returned his gaze, looking into those beautiful pupils that were as dark as an abyss containing a very complicated expression in its depths. She didn't understand his actions, nor did she want to understand. Suddenly, the cold, placid look in Nangong Luoyan's eyes turned into a tempest, releasing a fierce, frosty light. Glaring at her, he furiously said, "Where did you run off to for an entire day and night? Didn't I tell you not to leave? Why didn't you remain at the original place and wait for me?" Chapter 111. A Bitter Kiss, 1, Day and Night. Despite being constantly hunted down, constantly escaping and facing several dangerous, life-or-death situations, Su Luo had never felt depressed. But when faced with Nangong Luoyan's repeated interrogation, the softest spots near her heart suddenly throbbed with pain. It was a faint, gradual and dull pain. Su Luo's unwavering and experienced well-like eyes gazed back at Nangong Luoyan, lightly and dimly. The corners of her lips lifted into a breezy smile, indifferently spitting out 2 words. "Let go." Nangong Luoyan grip locked onto Su Luo's hand. Not only did he not let up, his grip tightened even more. Ink-black eyes stared with an overbearingly imposing chilly vigor. There was also a faint wavering emotion that Su Luo could not read. In the end, It was still Su Luo who conceded first. Her nose twitched slightly, and taking a deep breath, she batted her jet-black eyelashes insincerely at Nangong Luyin. Your Highness Prince Jean, I'm very sorry for having troubled you. But please don't worry, Su Luo will not be troubling you again in the future. Su Luo worked hard to restrain her turbulent emotions. Her tone was steady and unwavering, and her beautiful eyes held a hint of sarcasm. He was always telling her that he would treat her well. But upon meeting his childhood sweetheart, was she not still immediately discarded? However beautiful the promise, in the end it was only like this. Su Luo, in the end what are you feeling so sorrowful about? Was being hurt by Yin Qi in your previous life not enough? To actually be so naive as to hope that someone who would wholeheartedly treat you well? How laughable! Nangong Luyin quietly watched as Su Luo deliberately distanced herself from him. His expression grew terrifyingly somber, as if he was holding back in invisible anger. However, when he observed her closely, he saw her almost hysterical self-deprecating laugh that made it seem that she was simultaneously crying and laughing. His red lips parted a little as his eyes grew deeply frightening. In the end, his Adam's apple moved a bit, and he gazed deeply at Su Luo with a frown. How come you couldn't make others worry less? If anything were to happen to you, how will this king be able to explain this to your Su manor? Su Luo remained where she was. As refined as an ancient Greek sculpture, she emitted a subtle chill from her whole body. She lifted her gaze towards Nangong Luyin, coldly smilingly with veiled ridicule. Doesn't your Highness Prince Jean not know about the situation in Su Manor? If something happened to me, wouldn't it be really advantageous to certain people? They wouldn't have been able to thank you fast enough for it, so how could they even blame you? Nangong Luyin gazed deeply at Su Luo. His lips parted and closed slightly as a solemn, suffocating atmosphere surrounded them in their silence. Suddenly, Nangong Luyin's long arms swooped in and brought Su Luo tightly into his arms. His arms were strong and forceful. His chest was warm and hard, holding her tightly in his embrace. The hold almost squeezed out all of the air from her lungs, nearly suffocating her. His action was wild, tyrannical, and intense. Rejection was not an option. Coming from nowhere, the tight embrace caught Su Luo unprepared. By the time she recovered her composure, she was already imprisoned in his arms, unable to make the slightest move. He hugged her very, very tightly, and his lanky physique trembled slightly, a hard-to-suppress moving emotion, as if having found the precious treasure he had lost before. But was it really possible? The corner of Su Luo's lips lifted in faint irony. She wanted to push away from him, but found her own strength before this man was comparable to an ant trying to shake a giant tree, unable to move it a single jot. Nangong Luyin took unfair advantage of her body and began to kiss her. Su Luo's heart suddenly blazed with a wave of rage and indignation. She struggled and turned her face aside, his lips brushing past her cheek. Angered, Nangong Luyin bit at her lips again, in a punitive, overbearing manner. As she gasped in pain, his lively tongue forcibly pried open her teeth and probed the depths within, besieging and plundering her mouth in a willful and ravaging manner. This kind of kiss, under the watchful eyes of many, made Su Luo feel exceedingly uncomfortable. Chapter 112, A Bitter Kiss, 2. What kind of relationship did they have? What made Nangong Luyin think that he could do whatever he wanted with her? Her heart bursting with fury, Su Luo heavily stomped on Nangong Luyin's foot. Nangong Luyin smothered a grunt, and his arms encircling her tightened even more. His lips sucked and nibbled hers. Nangong Luyin continued kissing Su Luo, unmoved by the pain. Su Luo was so infuriated, she bit him in retaliation. Scarlet droplets of blood dripped from his lips. The blood erotically dropped from his thin lips to land on her petal-like ones. She could taste the scorching heat from the passionate emotions. Contained within that blood there were also some hard-to-describe feelings. They separated slightly. Nangong Luyin's phoenix eyes that were serene with hidden depths narrowed dangerously. They were fixated on her. Su Luo coldly widened her own pair of eyes, and refusing to back down, confronted the clearly cold and cruel expression within the depths of Nangong Luyin's eyes directly. Two pairs of eyes looked at each other, wordless and unspeaking. Suddenly, like an eagle swooping down from up high, Nangong Luoyan vigorously and commandingly held the back of Su Luo's head, using a large slender hand to forcefully lift up her chin. He leaned down and forcefully kissed her. His hot tongue ardently invaded her mouth, frantically wreaking havoc, causing the blood to mix and spread within her mouth. The metallic and sweet flavor overwhelmed Su Luo's senses. It was as if Nangong Luoyan wanted to use the blood to leave proof of his existence inside her. It also seemed to convey some kind of oath and affidavit of ownership. His actions were domineering and thoughtless. He kissed her with adamant intensity. When Su Luo was finally able to liberate her lips, lacking oxygen, she gasped for air using deep breaths. Her cheeks were scarlet. Su Luo felt as if the air she was breathing carried a scalding temperature that was abnormally hot. Nangong Luoyan's fine, bony hand lifted Su Luo's white jade-like chin. His deep eyes were blurred and carried a trace dejection. "Luo girl, never think about trying to leave this king. Even you won't be able to withstand the consequences of such an action." The corners of Su Luo's mouth rose into a slight smile. "Leave you? Please enlighten me, Your Highness Prince Jean. When did we get together?" Her dark eyes were obstinate and unconcerned, as if the kiss just now never happened, leaving her unaffected. She was still strongly resisting him, and wouldn't even acknowledge the relationship between them. This point made Nangong Luoyan especially incensed. Nangong Luoyan's complexion hazed over. His eyes were menacing, as if he wanted to swallow her whole. He used even more strength to grasp Su Luo's hand. However, Su Luo's expression remained unchanged. "Pain. You were injured." A caring expression flashed through Nangong Luoyan's cold, star-like eyes. He hurriedly released Su Luo. Nangong Luoyan finally noticed that Su Luo's hands had been forcefully bound before, leaving several traces of bruising. The bruises were quite deep, as if the binding had embedded into her flesh. In addition, both her face and body disclosed line after line of lacerations. These injuries were sufficient to illustrate that within the past day and night, Su Luo had spent the time facing various dangers. Who was it? Nangong Luoyan's icy, cruel eyes, that easily captivated people, were permeated with an intense rage. These injuries were clearly man-made, and not the work of magical beasts. The fury on his face increased, issuing forth a strong aura of death. His entire person immediately gave off a ruthless, bloodthirsty air like the alluring, cold-blooded Azura, shrouded with the darkness of the night. He was so furious. Was he really concerned about her? Su Luo's beautiful eyes gave off lights that were like the restless tossing of watery waves, cleverly revolving. Should she take a risk and bet on it? It was. Su Luo was thinking about telling the truth when she saw the Jade Lake's fairy soundlessly appear behind Nangong Luoyan. The Jade Lake's fairy was still as devastatingly beautiful as before. She was clothed in a white dress, the color as pure and holy as snow. The hem of the dress lightly danced with the wind. The Jade Lake's fairy stood there, showing a strong presence. With misty eyes that were like liquid fog, she clearly and calmly looked at Su Luo. Her elegant and extremely beautiful complexion revealed lips pursed in a flowing shallow smile. Chapter 113. A Bitter Kiss 3. She looked at Su Luo, and though her smile was broad and her voice clear as she spoke, she still chided Nangong Luoyan, third senior brother. "Miss Su has yet to heal her injuries. It's better to release her first, and let me take care of the rest." Nangong Luoyan's star-like eyes held a touch of tenderness, elegant clarity and gentle kindness as he nodded and replied, "Yao Yao is right. It was this king who was too impatient." Yet, despite having said so, his hold on Su Luo's hand did not loosen. Jade Lake's fairy was like a cold star that stared at those tight interwoven hands in front of her. A cold light flashed within her lovely eyes. Her simple and neat complexion blossomed with a faint smile. "Oh right. Did Miss Su see any of my mates along the way?" Su Luo looked at her with a smile full of undisguised mockery. Jade Lake's fairy tactic of making the first move, trying to trap her with this dilemma, was very clever. If she admitted that she had seen those mates, then where were they now? Why did they not appear together with Su Luo? If she did not admit to seeing them, then, when there was enough evidence to prove that she killed those mates, how would she be able to defend her stance? Those few words were akin to placing Su Luo on a burning grill while Jade Lake's fairy, this perpetuator of malicious acts, was simply speculating on the side as she leisurely sipped tea. Su Luo's heart grew vigilant. This Jade Lake's fairy before her not only had extraordinary looks, her shrewdness and scheming was also by no means average. Otherwise, why would Nangong Luyan trust her so, or give her preferential treatment? According to Cui Yu, the Jade Lake's fairy had dispatched a total of 4 maids. The first 3 had all died in front of Su Luo. As for the last person, she should be the archer, but Su Luo didn't know what had happened to her. However, before Su Luo could respond, suddenly, a black-robed shadow appeared in front of Nangong Luyan. He reverently and respectfully reported, "Reporting to Master, we found a suspect within the depression on a mountain not far from here. He was carrying this longbow." The black-robed killer stood with his eyes downcast. He deferentially offered the longbow to Nangong Luyan with both hands. This was an exquisitely handcrafted upper-grade curved bow. The bow was glowing with a faint luster. One glance, and you could tell that it was of considerable value. "Detain him, and bring him here." Nangong Luyan's entire body exuded a strong, imposing august aura. The depth of his eyes broke out in rage, suffused with evil demonic radiance. His whole person had the appearance of a bloodthirsty monster, savagely cruel and cold. Once she saw the person lying down on the ground with eyes tightly shut, Su Luo's eyes slightly creased. This person turned out to be Lu Weiming. How could it be him? Su Luo looked towards Jade Lake's fairy with a smile that was not a smile, while the other side merely returned her look with a soft, sweet-tempered smiling expression. It was as if she was saying that she, the Jade Lake's fairy, was completely unaware of the situation regarding the matter of hunting her down. And it was not her doing. Dead. Nangong Luyan's pair of icy eyes, the depths of which mesmerized people, radiated a dense killing intent. Yes, by the time we found him, he was already dead. The black-robed person deferentially responded. Nangong Luyan stroked the longbow, probing for traces of the owner. He confirmed that the killer definitely used this bow to kill people, but what could his motive have been to kill her? Nangong Luyan had a ferocious appearance, solemn and bloodthirsty. Qin Ning, who had silently appeared by the Jade Lake fairy's side, suddenly interjected. This servant once heard Miss Lu say that they had chased Miss Su to kill her. Miss Su, was this true? Wasn't this implying that only Su Luo would know the motive of why Lu Weiming would want to kill her? Chapter 114. A Bitter Kiss 4. Su Luo gazed at Qin Ning. A grim smile appeared on the corner of her mouth. The maid at Jade Lake Fairy's side was also not so simple. Were they hunting you? Nangong Luyan's dark eyes became increasingly malicious. His entire person seemed arrogant and aloof, emitting a dense majestic aura. Su Luo's smile was helpless and stark. They were not the only group of people that was hunting me. What Su Luo just said had a double meaning. She raised an eyebrow and looked at the Jade Lake's fairy with a smile that was not quite a smile. Her gaze landed on the fairy's white, pointed and extremely clever hands. That final arrow with world-shaking force. Could it really have not left a single trace on those pretty hands that were occupied with schemes? Within just this one day and night, it could be said that she had been surrounded by perils. If it weren't for the goddess of fortune standing on her side, she would have died 18,000 times by now. Today's hatred from being hunted, in the future Su Luo, would absolutely return it tenfold. At this time, the Jade Lake's fairy had a warm, soft and genial smile on her face. That smile was tranquil and serene, lacking even a ripple on the surface, a large body of water, as if she was a fairy from the heavenly realm. Nangong Luyan's beautiful icy eyes had a ruthless and savage light. It gazed deeply at Su Luo, stressing each word he asked. Who else were among the people trying to kill you? Nangong Luyan, this was what you demanded. It was not something I had voluntarily tattletaled. If I were to say that the Jade Lake Fairy's people were also among them, would you believe me? Su Luo employed a relaxed and mocking tone, while staring at him with a smile that was not quite a smile. However, an earnest and cautious expression very quickly passed through Su Luo's eyes. If Nangong Luyan believed her, then she would decide not to conceal the truth from him. She would reveal everything to him and tell him that his Jade Lake's fairy was a snake with a scorpion's vicious poison. If Nangong Luoyan did not believe her, Su Luo obliquely forced a bitter smile. An icy light swiftly flitted through Nangong Luoyan's hawk-like eyes. He rubbed her head, that pair of red phoenix eyes becoming even more joyous and demonically alluring as they gazed at her. With an indulgent and spoiling manner he said, "Do not joke around, you must tell this king the truth." In a split second, Su Luo's heart immediately dropped to the bottom. It was so cold as to reach the freezing point. Sure enough, she had expected too much. As expected, how could a few short days of association compete with the mutual trust developed from growing up together since childhood? The Jade Lake's fairy used a sweet-tempered smile to look at her. That pair of sparkling and translucent, jade-like beautiful eyes had a self-satisfied, boastful, gloating laugh in their depths. As if to say to Su Luo, "So what if I dispatch people to kill you? Nangong Luoyan doesn't believe you. He absolutely won't believe it." Yes, he did not believe it. Su Luo's mouth raised with a hint of irony. She forcefully pushed Nangong Luoyan away. In a very light tone and low volume said, "I'm tired, I want to rest." Now what was the point of saying even more? Anyhow, he believed in the Jade Lake's fairy without any doubt. Nangong Luoyan saw that she was in a bad mood. He thought it was because she was tired from this one day and night away. So he followed her wish and gently said, "Okay, we'll rest for one night here, and do our task tomorrow." "No need." Su Luo coldly refused. The task he was referring to was slaughtering an armored back dragon. Since her space was already open, there was no need go and kill a dragon. Believe in this king. This king will definitely find the culprit. Nangong Luoyan watched her back as she determinedly walked away. His sharp eyebrows were low. His voice was firm as if swearing an oath. Su Luo's mouth rose with a slight bitterness. "Find the killer? I had even told you who it was, yet you won't believe me. How will you find the killer then?" Su Luo's footsteps paused. She glanced back with a shallow smile. Her smile was like that of March's fireworks, dazzling and lonely. In a clear and indifferent voice, she said, "Really? Then I'll first thank you." Nangong Luoyan firmly watched her leaving figure from the back. His face was indeterminately flickering between clear and overcast, suddenly dark then bright. The veins of his knuckles tightened until they burst. Third senior brother. The Jade Lake fairy's charmingly gentle and beautiful eyes were like mist moving slightly. She somewhat hesitantly stared at Nangong Luoyan. "Do you believe me?" Chapter 115. Infuriated to the point of discarding all rational thoughts. 1. Nangong Luoyan's pair of star-shaped eyes were as cold as ice. He shot a piercing, penetrating glance at the Jade Lake's fairy. The chilly and desolate air emitting from his body was very thick. After a long pause, the corner of his mouth lifted into a brilliant but still thinly cold smile. He merely said, "Go back." He had already turned to leave before the sound of his words reached her. Third senior brother. The Jade Lake's fairy bit her lips and tugged on the hem of Nangong Luoyan's wide cloak. Her eyes were misty with tears, giving off a lovely yet woeful appearance. Nangong Luoyan's hand covered her slender white hands and harshly dislodged them. Without even turning his head, using large strides he departed. His figure from the back was very decisive and determined. Concealed by her sleeves, the veins in the Jade Lake fairy's hands violently started to burst. Her beautiful eyes also became malicious and a fierce, venomous killing intent flashed within their depths. "Young mistress, tonight, do you want this servant too?" Qin Ning whispered while making a slitting throat gesture, as she quietly approached the Jade Lake fairy's side. The Jade Lake fairy's eyes erupted like a volcano spewing out molten lava. Her palm directly slapped Qin Ning's face. "The best opportunity was wasted by you. Once we return, go to the punishment hall to receive your penance." This slap contained the force of heaven and earth. It was so severe that it had sent Qin Ning flying. Once she tumbled to the ground, Qin Ning immediately passed out. The Jade Lake fairy flung her sleeves then walked off with an formidable aura of death. That same night, the Jade Lake's fairy took her group of people and left. They decamped, leaving everything so clean and neat it was as if they had never been. That group of black-robed people had also evacuated neatly, without leaving a trace behind. On the horse carriage that was returning, one more person had been added. The added person was Ling Feng. He was Nangong Liuyan's hidden bodyguard. Normally, he would stealthily protect Nangong Liuyan. The dragon-scaled horse ran like the wind. Su Luo was seated inside the carriage in a resting position with her back facing Nangong Liuyan and eyes closed. This type of posture was a deliberate snub, rejecting all conversation. Her expression was nonchalant, like clouds on the horizon. It was so remote and distant, making Su Luo seem unreachable. Nangong Liuyan's expression was brooding. As his complexion slowly darkened, Su Luo was attempting to straighten her body when suddenly a large shadow enveloped her entire person. She unconsciously opened her eyes. Before Su Luo could focus, unexpectedly she was confined within Nangong Liuyan's embrace. His slender fingers glided over her face and paused between her lips. Her lips were exceptionally beautiful. They were light in color, moist and plump, evoking the phrase suitable to be kissed. Nangong Liuyan leaned down. His beautiful, perfect, and thin lips kissed Su Luo's lightly colored lips. But Su Luo firmly pushed him away. "Are you still blaming this king?" Nangong Liuyan asked in a low voice, his scorching gaze fixated on her. Su Luo was wordlessly silent. "Angry at this king for abandoning you that day?" Nangong Liuyan's voice was clearly cold. Su Luo remained silent. Within the carriage, there was a period of silence. After what seemed to be a long time, Nangong Liuyan delivered some words in explanation. "She and this king grew up together. She saved this king's life once. There are some matters that you don't understand and are unlikely to understand." Su Luo opened her eyes and shot him an offhand glance. All of a sudden, the corner of her mouth hooked into a taunting smile, and she asked in a contrary manner, "Right, how could I blame you?" What Nangong Liuyan intended to say was choked off by her words. A look of astonishment containing complicated feelings flashed across his eyes. This prompted him to return to his frequent habit of staring at Su Luo. Su Luo lifted her eyebrows, giving him a smile that was not a smile. "What qualifications do I have to blame you? Like you said, the two of you have been together since childhood. You are childhood sweethearts with mutual trust. You have saved each other's lives. We are only strangers who came together by chance, and have between us a few short days of friendship. Therefore, how could I blame you?" Chapter 116. Infuriated to the point of discarding all rational thoughts, 2. In a split second, Nangong Liuyan's complexion became exceptionally unsightly. His 10 fingers were intercrossed together. Entire body was icy cold and bloodthirsty. He was seething with anger. Could it be what I said was wrong? Su Luo heedlessly watched him. The corner of her mouth perked up in a light, nonchalant smile. "You guys are childhood sweethearts, while we are merely nodding acquaintances. It's obvious which is important, and which is not with just a glance. How could it be wrong that you elected to save her? If I were you, I would choose to save her too." "Acquaintances?" Nangong Liuyan's phoenix eyes narrowed. "Or are we not even considered acquaintances?" Su Luo seemed to be infuriating him for her own enjoyment. Nangong Liuyan's rage burned up, his face became grim. His long and thin fingers pinched at her neck, even though his smile was tender and soft as water. His single-minded, devoted expression was simply touching. "Su Luo, do you believe that this king will put you to death?" The man leaning over was like Satan, and could make one's heart full of fearful thoughts. However, Su Luo knew she could not yield. Once she gives in, it would be like being submerged in an endless abyss. She would completely lose herself. Su Luo stubbornly met his eyes head-on. The corner of her mouth rose, and a vague flowery smiling countenance appeared. "Just because I refused you, was that the reason you want to put me to death?" His Highness the legendary Prince Jin still amounts to nothing more than this. Luo, you better not challenge the bottom line of this king's patience." Nangong Liuyan bent one knee, semi-kneeling, leaning into her. Tenderness, dizziness, and puzzlement in a blink of an eye. Those emotions passed through the eyes fixed on her. "That kind of consequence is not something you will be able to bear." "Really? What type of consequences? I really would want to try it." She confronted Nangong Liuyan's tender and soft as water expression that concealed a vengeful bloodthirstiness. A touch of fear passed through Su Luo's heart. Nevertheless, she unhesitantly counterattacked. Su Luo, don't tell me you don't know. This king had already decided that Prince Jin's wife and princess is you. I will never let you go. As if Nangong Luoyuan was making a vow, his beautiful eyes were tender and soft as water. A gorgeous smile on his face, his voice was gentle and soft like a feather floating by. Therefore don't try to refuse or even flee, or you can only get hurt. Haha, really funny. Su Luo focused on his gaze, as if wanting to know how he will hurt her. Nangong Luoyuan's authority had suffered a provocating blow, yet he laughed in a matchless gorgeous manner. He was at the pinnacle of pure, sinister darkness, from the moment he met her. He never intended to set her free. This was a type of obsession. He had an obsession, and the formidable capital to carry out his desires. He even started to consider, if he should, in order to keep her by his side, break off her wings or join in helping her soar higher with her talent. A choice at this point, with no foreseeable outcome. Right now, she could only see that his face and everything else was being turned upside down as quickly as lightning. He cruelly bit her lip. This time's Nangong Luoyuan seemed to be possessed by the soul of a devil, remote and wildly ruthless. He fiercely dug open her teeth, and violently laid siege to the gap between her lips and teeth too, arousing the strong passions like those experienced during a perilous situation. Su Luo had no time to react before being assaulted. Once she came to her senses, she discovered that he had an iron grip on the back of her head, and her entire body was covered by his. She couldn't move the slightest bit. This was too much. What gives him the right to do whatever he pleases with her? Obviously the one who abandoned her was him. Clearly he chose to believe his childhood sweetheart. Now what reason does he have to show off such love towards her, and pressured her so she can't reject it? If Su Luo was a regular woman then fine, but she definitely wasn't. In her past life, she was a famous gold medal level assassin. She dealt with the underground dark world all year round. The words being wronged and bullied cannot possibly exist when talking about her. 1. Tender and soft as water. Chinese idiom for deeply attached to someone. 2. Lips and teeth. Chinese idiom with figurative meaning of close partners or interdependent. Chapter 117. Infuriated to the point of discarding all rational thoughts. 3. Fury flashed through Su Luo's heart. She swung a fist containing all the power in her body, and smashed it with as much force as she could toward Nangong Luoyuan's 5 viscera and 6 bowels. 1. This fist contained all her strength. Nangong Luoyuan let out a groan, and suddenly loosened his grip. Su Luo's face was full of indignation and fury, so she did not carefully look at him. She ruthlessly pushed him away. She turned around, lifted the curtain, and jumped out of the carriage in a rage. His horse carriage was not the only one on the road back to the capital. Even if it was the only one, Su Luo would rather use her own pair of legs to walk back. She would definitely not trouble him again. Panting with rage, Su Luo turned on her heels and walked away. She had not noticed the peculiarity of Nangong Luoyuan's appearance then. After being pushed aside, Nangong Luoyuan hit the carriage wall, and his complexion became as pale as paper. His right hand was pressed to his chest. His smooth and slender fingers could not stop trembling. Luo Luo, he opened the carriage curtains, and sickly called out. Su Luo did not even bother to turn her head. Her back was cold and determined. Suddenly she heard the sound of a heavy weight fall to the ground behind her, along with Ling Feng's anxious cry. Su Luo stopped her footsteps, thought about it, and ultimately decided to glance back. Just one look made her deeply purse her brows. She unexpectedly saw the godlike Nangong Luoyuan's entirely battered and exhausted body tumble to the ground. On his white brocade robe, his chest area was full stained with fresh blood. His originally handsomely sculpted, tall and straight body now seemed extremely weak, like glass that would shatter with one touch. His former dark red lips were tainted with blood. It was devilishly alluring and wildly untamed. Now with difficulty he propped himself up, a pair of beautiful eyes dim as frost. Even though he was pale and weak, he stared deeply at Su Luo with a demonically charming expression. His pair of eyes were fixed straight at Su Luo since the beginning, and he remained silent, not speaking a word. His pitch-black inky eyes held a deep meaning, making Su Luo's heart throb incessantly. Nangong Luoyan, what is wrong with him? How did he suddenly become so weak? Su Luo looked at her own pair of hands with a confounded expression. Right now she shouldn't be strong enough to hit Nangong Luoyan until he spit out blood, right? Suddenly Nangong Luoyan's entire body seemed to be possessed by a litany of evil, vampiric spirits. Cold sweat poured from his face. His complexion immediately became deathly pale. His entire body began to shake and tremble. His scarlet, snowy lips instantly became purple and bruised. He grinded his teeth and tightly shut his mouth, as if unable to suppress a large power was about to surge out. Not good. His Highness is about to go into recoil of madness too. As His Highness Prince Jin's personal bodyguard, Ling Feng was so terrified that his hands and foot had gone soft. His Highness Prince Jin was someone they all worshipped and believed in. If he lives, then the Tiger Wolf Regiment lives. He dies, then the Tiger Wolf Regiment would be exterminated. Therefore, nothing must happen to High Highness Prince Jin. Ling Feng's complexion fluctuated. One moment it was pale, and another it was ashen. He looked back and fiercely glared at Su Luo, and sternly said, His Highness is about to enter recoil of madness. Quickly come back and help. This woman, she actually hit His Highness until he was about to enter recoil of madness. Right now Ling Feng was itching to kill Su Luo with one palm strike. A touch of confusion appeared in Su Luo's eyes. How could she have the strength to hit Nangong Luoyan into recoil of madness? How powerful was Nangong Luoyan's strength compared to how powerful her strength was? This person was speaking nonsense. Seeing Su Luo's disbelief, Ling Feng was about to die from anger. He loudly shouted at Su Luo. Because His Highness wanted to save you, he broke protocol and sent the signal to summon the Tiger Wolf Regiment to come. Because His Highness wanted to see you earlier. Originally he could have break through and advanced another rank, but by forcibly stopping the process, he maimed his own body to the point where his 5 viscera and 6 bowls were nearly dislocated. Not to mention His Highness's battle with the Vulture King, where his internal injury was so heavy that he almost died from the wounds. Chapter 118. Infuriated to the point of discarding all rational thoughts, for Ling Feng's pair of eyes were red with rage. It was as if he wanted to swallow Su Luo whole. He pointed at Su Luo and loudly snarled. His Highness, in order to not make you anxious, continuously pretended that nothing was wrong with him. You, however, you actually returned all his good intentions with such a heavy blow. I really don't understand why His Highness would love such a malicious woman. Su Luo was dazed by Ling Feng's denunciation. She blankly stared at Ling Feng. Every sentence and every word that he said whirled around in her mind. Nangong Luoyan in that battle had unexpectedly suffered a serious injury. Furthermore, in order to save her, he had repeatedly sustained even more injuries? How could this be? Ling Feng's bloodshot eyes quickly glared at Su Luo. His hands wiped away the liquid that had squeezed out of his eyes. Blaff. Nangong Luoyan could not suppress it anymore, and a mouthful of blood wildly sprayed out. Su Luo was terrified to the point of becoming paralyzed. She quickly walked forward, and with one knee bent kneeled in front of him. An apprehensive panic that never appeared before flashed through her eyes. What to do? What should we do? Su Luo gazed at Nangong Luoyan's chest. That area was blooming like a red spider lily. The pretty and flirtatious red color was spreading. It rapidly saturated the white brocade robe, leaving a dark pattern. Scarlet liquid drop by drop fell from his lightly colored thin lips in quick succession. The vicious, dense blood on his chest saturated the air. The smell of blood immediately assaulted her nose as it engulfed his entire body. However, Nangong Luoyan seemed to be completely unaware of the pain. His eyes were diluted like the mist. A smiling expression was hanging from the corner of his mouth. Within Nangong Luoyan's black eyes was an endless, deep abyss. His entire body gave off a flirtatious and enticing manner that was strangely pessimistic and full of despair at the same time. He carried a strong air of self-abandonment and self-destructiveness, while still being incomparably handsome. Nangong Liuyan's current state terrified and alarmed Su Luo, but it also made her heart beat faster. The rims of Su Luo's eyes gradually become moist. How could this have happened? This was not what she wanted. Su Luo had never thought that she could injure Nangong Liuyan so severely. She had been enraged when she had smashed him with her fist. She had never imagined that he could be wounded so profoundly. Su Luo's eyes misted over, and she repeatedly shook her head. She wanted to tell him that she had not done it on purpose. In a moment of rage, she had spoken irresponsibly and hit him. In the future, she wouldn't dare to do it again. Unexpectedly, Nangong Liuyan dropped down on one knee and kneeled in front of Su Luo. He wrapped his hands tightly around hers. Because he was doing his best to ignore the pain, the blue veins on the back of Nangong Liuyan's smooth white hands popped out. His hands trembled faintly. Nangong Liuyan was quite unaware of how scary his current appearance was. His pair of beautiful and flirtatious eyes gazed at Su Luo in a tender and soft manner. He started to smile even though he lacked body heat. Nangong Liuyan's demeanor sent a message that even if the entire world collapsed in front of him in the next second, he would not even furrow an eyebrow. He determinedly and gently looked at Su Luo. This is your last chance, Luo Luo. If you stay, from now on you will never be able to leave. Su Luo could only shake her head. She wanted to apologize. She wanted to say, I'm sorry. But it was as if her throat had been pinched closed. No matter how she tried, she could not make a sound. Have you completely vented your anger? Nangong Liuyan's smile was very light. It resembled the clouds on the horizon, unattainable and out of reach. Not waiting for Su Luo to answer, Nangong Liuyan once again started to speak. In the event that your heart is still incensed, I will give you another opportunity. From his sleeves, he unexpectedly took out a dagger. He stuffed it into Su Luo's hand and determinedly looked at her. Ling Feng was immediately scared out of his mind. Your Highness, that dagger could kill with a single blow. In addition, it was coated with a highly toxic poison. With just a slight touch on skin, a rot will spread through the entire body. Anyone affected would be entirely beyond saving. Who allowed you to speak? Scram. Nangong Liuyan had always treated other people without the slightest restraint, his behavior always oppressive and unpredictable. In a split second, it seemed as if time froze. Regarding His Highness Prince Jin, Ling Feng was already accustomed to following his orders. Prince Jin's every word, sentence, and action had already been ingrained as orders in the minds of his followers, since long ago, to the point that complying without question had become a reflex. Chapter 119. Infuriated to the point of discarding all rational thoughts. 5. To comply with him, to obey him, it seemed to have already become intuitive. An instinct, so natural that it seemed to have been carved into one's flesh and blood. To resist His Highness Prince Jin required a great deal of courage. Ling Feng bit his lip. Furious, he closed his mouth and stood aside. Since ancient times, beautiful women have been the source of numerous calamities. The ancients were right in this regard. They didn't deceive me. Lin Feng's eyes were bloodshot, and both of his hands were clenched into fists. With his eyes as cold as ice, he heartlessly stared at Su Luo. Nangong Liuyan stuffed the dagger into Su Luo's hand. His laugh, which was like a soft cloud and a gentle wind in the clear sky, it was also flirtatious and threatening. His finger pointed at his own chest, and he softly coaxed her. Come, stab here. Stabbing here will let you vent your anger. Be obedient. His facial expression was unperturbed and lacked any emotion. His hands unyieldingly detained Su Luo's hand, not allowing any room for resistance. Su Luo was both scared and angry, and involuntarily cried out. Nangong Liuyan, enough. Seriously, enough. Quickly stay your hands. Nangong Liuyan, with a deathly tight grip, held her hand. The corner of his mouth rose as he laughed in a flirtatious and enticing manner, tranquil and intoxicating like the cherry blossoms in March. He wouldn't let her refuse, gripping the wrist of her hand that held the dagger. The blade tip was directed towards his own heart. You know, when I, Nangong Liuyan, do things, there has never been a person who would dare utter half a sentence of criticism, and I have also never cared about other people's opinions. However, you Su Luo are an exception. Nangong gripped her hand securely, His eyes gave off an ice-cold aura. You can retaliate. Come vent your anger. Nangong Liuyan's pitch-black eyes stared at her, looking deep into her eyes. He took her hands, with the dagger blade tip aimed towards his own heart, and positioned it at the most fatal point. No matter how high your martial skill was, the heart was always the most fatal location. With one knife stab at it, even the most powerful martial arts expert will die. He tightly clutched her hand. His demeanor was calm, his expression blank, drawing nearer bit by bit. He was very overbearing, forcing her to kill him. Su Luo repeatedly shook her head, and she did everything to pry away her hands from his hold. She was mouthing, I'm sorry that I treated you badly, I'm sorry. Su Luo's heart repeated these I'm sorry's 10,000 times, but she was unable to speak a single word. However, Nangong Liuyan turned a deaf ear, and just laughed indifferently. His smile was like the fireworks in March, gorgeous yet lonely. The depths of his eyes were clearly laughing, but his pupils outwardly showed incomparable indifference. He caressed Su Luo's face, calling her name. I, Nangong Liuyan, have never been sincere towards anyone, except for you. After barely finished speaking, his eyes flashed with a ruthless light. He strongly pressed down on her hands and thrust towards his own chest. Tears suddenly rushed out of Su Luo's eyes with a sob sound. This person was really a demon. Being ruthless to others was one thing, but he was actually also so heartless to himself. At the last moment, Su Luo used all her strength to make the thrusting dagger slant sideways. It stabbed towards an indentation on his shoulder where his collarbone was, barely avoiding the fatal location of his heart. She watched him collapse and saw he was close to being suffocated. It seemed as if he didn't even have the strength to keep his eyelids open, yet he was still using his deep and intense eyes to unblinkingly stare at her while smiling. Su Luo tightly clenched her fist. In a flash she understood. Nangong Liuyan was using his life to scheme against her, little by little pressing harder, constantly trapping her. He was taking a gamble. He was betting that at the last crucial moment, she would force him to avoid the fatal point. He was betting that she, Su Luo, could not bear to see him die. He was betting that she, Su Luo, actually had a thread of affection toward him. He was this kind of man. His heart was scheming, sophistically shrewd, and calculative. He also had formidable power as well as endless capital. The type of man that he was, even if he gave a certain woman an opportunity, she would never be able to escape. He said that she was an exception. Could it be that even after so many years, she was the only one who had been given this choice? In Su Luo's mind, suddenly lightly floated the image of that simple and neat beautiful woman who could overturn a country. Could it be that he never gave the Jade Lakes Fairy a chance? Chapter 120. Infuriated to the point of discarding all rational thoughts. 6. Apparently you still have not vented all the anger in your heart, girl. Nangong Liuyan looked at her while smiling. He saw her expression continued to change, and his eyes were gentle, flirtatious, and compelling. Is it still not enough? Then do you want to try again? Will you stab it in from here? Or there? Or maybe here? Nangong Liuyan, stop acting crazy. Hurry up and release my hand. Do you hear me? Su Luo stared at him with a complicated look. If he was not so weak and pale, she would have definitely slapped him like how she did before. Why was he using his own life to pressure her? If it was possible, she really wanted to turn around and leave, to abandon this man who detached any value from his own life. Let him fend for himself, self-destruct through madness, and then perish. But she couldn't, because she had saddled herself with the guilt of causing him to go into recoil of madness in the first place. Do you forgive me now? Nangong Liuyan was panting. His handsome countenance was sweating profusely, but he still looked at her seriously. Su Luo glared at him coldly. Her eyes swept across the bloody dagger. The blood color emitted a strange cold light under the sun. Su Luo's heart throbbed in an unexpected coincidence. She roared at him. Forgive! I forgive you! She knew if she dared to say, I never blamed you, those words, next time, if it wasn't him strangling her, then it would be her forcefully strangling him. Because those two sentences, the meaning contained within was not the same. I never blamed you, meant, I never cared about you in the first place. Which is why she wouldn't blamed him. This man, in regards to reading people's intent through language, was likely to nitpick her answer down to the tiniest details. Then, that's good. A trace of satisfaction flashed through Nangong Liuyan's waning, but smiling expression. It seemed as if he was forcefully enduring everything until this moment. He finally relaxed and afterwards immediately collapsed to the ground. Nangong Liuyan. Su Luo hastily caught and held on to him while frantically shouting out loud. Cold sweat covered Nangong Liuyan's face, who had collapsed into her embrace. His lips were purple and black. His entire body appeared to have been immersed in icy water and was covered in a layer of sweat. Su Luo was clearly able to sense he had already lost consciousness. However, his body still repeatedly shivered from head to toe and remained unable to suppress the repeated trembles. Just now, even though he was in this condition, he had still stubbornly propped himself up to compel her to kill him. Su Luo was not afraid to meet a fiercely cruel person. However, a person who could be so fiercely cruel to such an extent, even on themselves, was a person worth dreading. It's all because of you. If it was not for you, His Highness would never end up this way. When Ling Feng saw Nangong Liuyan faint, he ran to his side without delay. While scrambling to snatch Nangong Liuyan's body from her, he was also raised his head and loudly bellowed at Su Luo. Su Luo's blood and qi was boiling from being yelled by him. A mouthful of blood almost bursted out. She clenched her teeth and was finally able to swallow the sweet and metallic taste. Coldly responded to Ling Feng. What's the point of yelling at me now? The most important thing is to think of a way to save him. I'm not familiar with this. Now it all depends on you. Ling Feng's pair of eyes were crimson and bloodshot, similar to a trapped ferocious beast. He threw a deadly glare at Su Luo. Hugging Nangong Liuyan's body, he got on the dragon-scaled horse. He sat on top of the carriage, raised his horsewhip, and was just about to leave. He thought about it. Still in the end his patience, he shouted towards Su Luo. Time is running out. Quickly get in the carriage. If he considered only his original desires, he would naturally want to abandon Su Luo. The further he left her the better. However, Ling Feng was not a fool. He had realized deep down that Su Luo had a special status within Nangong Liuyan's heart. That area was a place that even the Jade Lake's fairy had never touched before. If His Highness was to wake up and not see Su Luo, this evildoer, what terrible things would happen if he went out, once again, to find her? For the time being, Su Luo completely disregarded Ling Feng's nasty attitude. She was only worried about Nangong Liuyan. If he met any misfortune because of her, she would blame herself and be mournful for the rest of her life. Therefore, without another word, Su Luo jumped into the carriage and said to Ling Feng, "Quickly, let's go." Chapter 121. Infuriated to the point of discarding all rational thoughts. 7. It seemed even the dragon-scaled horse had sensed its owner's weakening breath, and it neighed agitatedly. Casting out its hooves, it bolted forward. At that moment, the dragon-scaled horse's running speed was comparable to flying. Within the carriage, Su Luo tightly hugged the unconscious body of Nangong Liuyan, which was starting to stiffen. Her heart was filled with extreme regret. If she had not punched him with her fist, would the result have been different? Nangong Liuyan, nothing bad must happen to you. A single teardrop silently fell onto and rolled down Nangong Liuyan's bloodstained face, leaving behind a clear white streak. In less than 2 hours, the dragon-scaled horse pulled to a stop at the entrance of a lavish manor. Ling Feng hurriedly jumped off the carriage. Having seen the dragon-scaled horse's approach, a steward had already excitedly rushed out from within the manor. The steward was around 50 years old. He had eyes that were both bright and alert, and a physique that was straight and strong. One could tell at a glance that he was a martial artist, and not a weak one at that. He saw Ling Feng, and his expression flashed a trace of excitement. "Has His Highness arrived?" Ling Feng anxiously shouted. "His Highness is injured. Stop tarrying and quickly come help." Obviously, this lavish and ornate manor was for Nangong Liuyan's private use. Hearing this, Steward Su was instantly horrified. His Highness Prince Jean was injured? His Highness Prince Jean could actually be injured? With His Highness Prince Jin's level of martial arts proficiency, how could he be injured? Steward Su felt that this was simply too preposterous. However, when he saw Ling Feng hurriedly jump out of the dragon-scaled horse carriage, while carrying the blood-soaked body of Prince Jin, he felt his heart would stop beating. What happened to His Highness? Who was it? Steward Su's eyes flashed with alarm and anger. Ling Feng bitterly glared at Su Luo, but kept his silence. He lengthened his strides to dash into the house instead. Su Luo's body was covered with Nangong Liuyan's blood, and thus at the moment, looked a little pitiful. Calmly, she nodded towards Steward Su. Hurry and get the best doctor to come. His Highness Prince Jin has gone into the recoil of madness. When Steward Su saw Su Luo, his prideful ability to keep calm disappeared. He could not help widening his pair of eyes in shock. All who served by His Highness's side knew that His Highness was extremely fastidious, and that no one was allowed within 1 meter of his whole body, especially women. This dragon-scaled horse carriage, other than Ling Feng who drove it, no one else was allowed to enter. However, when he lifted the carriage curtain earlier, he clearly saw His Highness collapsed in her arms. His Highness had actually allowed this miss to get close to him, to ride in the dragon-scaled horse carriage, which even the Jade Lake's ferry was not allowed to enter. Immediately, the way Steward Su looked at Su Luo changed. It no longer contained a guarded precaution towards outsiders. His present gaze even held a thread of deferential humility. Miss, how may I address you? Su. Su Luo replied plainly. Miss Su, sorry to trouble you, but please enter and take care of His Highness. Ling Feng may not be able to give him proper care with his rough manner. This old servant will now go and invite the best apothecary. Steward Su nodded solemnly towards Su Luo before he turned away and left taking great strides. To suffer recoil of madness during cultivation, a general doctor, no matter how brilliant, could do nothing. He could only seek an apothecary's help in this matter. Within this Nanming prefecture lived an advanced apothecary. Not to mention in the small Nanming prefecture, even within the entire Eastern Ling Empire, and on the whole continent, advanced apothecaries were very rare. Steward Su knew that this legendary advanced apothecary was eccentric, arrogant and temperamental, almost to the point of making people bitterly detest him. Chapter 122. Infuriated to the point of discarding all rational thoughts. 8. Unless one had a heavenly treasure that could move him, such as the precious and rare primeval pill recipes, getting him to act would be difficult, extremely difficult. If His Highness Prince Jin's name was used to accomplish this, no, it would be inappropriate. He would not even dignify to the king's request with an answer, much less entertain His Highness Prince Jin. Not to mention, with so many enemies out there after His Highness Prince Jin's life, if the news of His Highness's injury were to leak out, that would far from being good. If it was in the capital, Prince Jin's manor had countless rare treasures. But here in the Nanming prefecture, the treasures that could be counted were far from sufficient. Steward Su's heart was anxious and apprehensive, yet he could only retrieve the most precious treasures from within the warehouse. He left in a hurry with an escort party towards the apothecary's estate. Su Luo tailed after Ling Feng in the direction. He flew with a surprisingly fast speed. When she arrived, she saw 2 rows of uniformed guards outside the room. Every one of them bore a similar expression and movements, solemn, majestic. Their imposing manner was intimidating and emitted a fully oppressive atmosphere. Su Luo was stopped outside the door. Ling Feng hollered out, "Throw her in here." Even though Ling Feng was very worried, he had not completely lost his mind yet. Although he was very unwilling to let Su Luo near his own master, it was already obvious that only with her around would His Highness fight to live. Such a discovery would drive people mad. Accordingly, Ling Feng had become so depressed that he started to pull out his own hair. Su Luo completely was unaware of Ling Feng's inner conflict. When she entered, she discovered that Ling Feng had already placed Nangong Liuyan in bed. On the sickbed, Nangong Liuyan's eyes were tightly closed. His eyes when open were sharp and abstruse, cold and steady, but now they were tightly shut. Despite his vulnerability, His current appearance still gave off a strong enough aura to make people tremble with fear. His red lips were alluring and formed a picturesque face that could grace a painting. Hot, fresh blood dyed his white robe, and the outside of his cheeks, from his neck down, was dotted with bloodstains. The him right now, although frail and pale, still leaked out the same formidable domineering air as before. "You do it." Ling Feng's hands held a piece of embroidered cloth, and with a trace of anger, he tossed it to Su Luo. His Highness Prince Jin was very misophobia. Even though he had followed at His Highness's side for more than 10 years, he still had to maintain a distance of 1 meter from His Highness's body. Just now, when he carried His Highness inside, it was due to a moment of desperation, and because he saw no other option. However, this evildoer Su Luo was different. His Highness would probably be more than eager to have her get closer to him, right? Ling Feng hatefully thought. Su Luo held the soft, clean towel and slowly walked to Nangong Liuyan's side. Sitting by his bedside, she silently gazed at him. The ever-noble, conceited and icily cold Highness Prince Jin now appeared to be painfully suffering in a deep abyss. He appeared to be very pitiable, and his current condition could not help but make people's hearts soften. Her cool, jade-like slender fingers brushed away a few strands of hair on his forehead and delicately, using the soft towel, wiped clean, centimeter by centimeter, the blood that covered his skin. That pure white jade-like radiant skin, little by little regained its glittering splendor in the wake of her towel. But he remained unconscious, and his body was like a block of shifting ice, entirely stiff as iron and continuously shivering. As if he was so cold, he could pass away at any moment. Why has the apothecary not come yet? His Highness can't hold on any longer. Ling Feng was so worried that both his eyes became red. He then resolutely spoke to Su Luo. "Take good care of His Highness. I'll go out, return quickly." He said what he needed to say, and without waiting for Su Luo's reply, his silhouette had already disappeared from where he was standing. Su Luo secretly reasoned that Ling Feng was an expert, and not just any expert, but one who was second only to Nangong Liuyan. Suddenly, she felt something lock around her hand. Looking down once more, she discovered Nangong Liuyan's bony and smooth hand tightly gripped around hers. Chapter 123. Infuriated to the point of discarding all rational thoughts. 9. The large pool of blood on his chest was like an extremely beautiful decoration, gaudy and unpleasant to her eyes. It painfully stung her vision, and left traces of moisture upon the rims of her eyes. He tightly gripped Su Luo's right hand. His joints used all its strength to press down. Just a little more, and the strength of the grip could almost cut off her wrist. Painful, it really was painful. Su Luo pursed her lips. It was so agonizing that Su Luo felt as if his grip would tighten, until all her veins burst. She lowered her head and looked down. She saw the color of her veins rapidly retreat, leaving the skin blanched white. Nangong Liuyan's grip was so tight that his fingers seemed to have entered her flesh. To use such strength, Su Luo was in so much pain that she was completely numb. However, her mouth was tightly closed, and she dared not speak a word, let alone to risk reminding him to release her hand. Su Luo understood that right now he was in a lot of pain. He was in so much pain that he had fainted, but he continued to suffer in agony. The amount of pain he was currently enduring was greater than hers by thousands, no 10,000 times. And she knew she was the cause this evil that plagued him. How could she cry out and complain about pain in front of him? If it could ease some of her guilt, then she wished the pain would be even more fierce and severe. Therefore her pure white wrist was almost squeezed until the bones shattered, and her entire body trembled from the agony. However, she remained motionless. Her other hand steadily moved slowly, and little by little it wiped clean the jade-like skin on his face. She wiped away the large amount of cold sweat that were pouring out. Whenever she finished cleaning off the current layer of sweat, another layer would swiftly cover his face. His jaw was tightly clenched, and his lower lip was being bitten until the blood slowly flowed down. A trace of pain crossed Su Luo's heart. Such thin, good-looking lips shaped to perfection. It's such a pity to damage it. Without thinking, Su Luo extended her finger to prop open his jaw. Pain! In a split second, Su Luo's long, shapely eyebrows tensed. Her body, however, was still fixed in place, motionless. Only until this moment was she able to deeply feel how deep was his pain. When Ling Feng entered, this was the exquisite scene that stood frozen in time for him to see. He saw Su Luo's hand that was blanched white from being squeezed, with wrist bones close to shattering, as well as her other hand that was bitten until it was dripping blood. A thread of astonishment flashed through the depths of his eyes, and it was followed by a clear understanding of what had really transpired. Since the first time they met, he had always been harsh, unreasonable, and critical of Su Luo. Her very appearance would cause his eyebrows to stand and furrow at her. However, he no longer had the malice and the provocation as before. This was something that was spread afterwards. When Ling Feng quietly retreated outside, he saw Su San hastened over. Behind him followed an elderly man with white hair. Following closely at the heels of the elderly man was a small child with a medicine box. A chill flashed through Ling Feng's eyes. He grabbed Su San the third shirt collar. Where is the one with surname of Lung? Didn't they go to invite the advanced apothecary Lung Yan? How come the person that came was not him? Su San's entire face was pale. He felt sad and helpless. Steward Su stayed behind at Master Lung's manor, but nobody even saw a trace of Master Lung. Steward Su was helpless, and had no other choice but to send us to invite Apothecaries Wa here first. Apothecaries Wa was an intermediate apothecary, which was one level lower than Lung Yan. However, now they could only invite him first to have a look. Steward Su was still trying to think of ideas over at Lung Manor. After Apothecaries Wa entered, he checked his pulse, then meticulously and carefully examined him. He frowned, then said to Ling Feng and Su Luo, "This is too serious. This old man has not the slightest confidence of a cure. It's better to invite Apothecary Lung over to take a look. If we were able to invite him over, why would we invite you?" Ling Feng did not give him any face, and immediately became angry. His Highness Prince Jin's injury almost drove him insane, like the roars of a trapped beast. At any time, he was prepared to pounce toward an enemy. Apothecaries Wa was also a little helpless. Who told him that he would be so lacking in ability before the current situation? Su Luo watched Nangong Luyan continuously shivering on the bed, frowned and asked, "What would we need to invite that apothecary Lung over here?" Chapter 124. To adapt to one's taste 1. Difficult, very difficult. Apothecaries Wa sighed. Unless the treasure you gave could move Apothecary Lung's heart, otherwise, based on how eccentric and proud Apothecary Lung is, he would definitely not personally help to save a life. Even His Majesty the Emperor's royal edict won't work? Su Luo frowned. The position of the apothecary could reach such a height? Yes. Even if His Majesty were to send an imperial edict, it still won't be able to invite him. After all, Apothecary Lung is only the third advanced apothecaries to appear in the country of Eastern Ling. Apothecaries was stroked his beard, eyes filled with admiration. Since apothecaries were extremely rare, the royal family regarded apothecaries as extremely important. They were even accorded with an unusually high degree of freedom. You could even say that if an apothecary wanted to serve the empire, they could just report their name, and they would get a high post with a generous salary. A mountain of gold or silver, beautiful women and land grants. As long as their demands didn't threaten the stability of the empire, they could simply name their price. It could thus be seen what kind of transcendent status an apothecary had on this continent. Su Luo stood up. She silently glanced at Nangong Luyan, and then turned her head to Ling Feng to say, "Looks like I have to personally make a trip to Lung Manor. Nangong Luyan will be in your care." Ling Feng's brows tightly knotted. If Steward Su could not invite him over, what kind of method could you have? "It's better that I go." He turned around to leave. If polite words can't invite him over, how about being invited by force? Others may fear to offend Lung Yan, but he, Ling Feng, was not afraid. Su Luo stopped him. Her expression was calm and collected. Her tone was very firm. "Believe in me. Only I can invite him to come here." Finished speaking, she spoke to Apothecaries Wa. "I still need to further impose on Apothecaries Wa to lead the way. Time is limited. Apothecaries Wa, please." Apothecary Zhuo was curious about what kind of method this miss had to be so confident and boast that she could invite Apothecary Lung to come. Therefore he readily agreed. Although Ling Feng did not approve, he also did not block Su Luo. After all, this was also a chance at hope. If Su Luo was unable to invite him to come in the end, then he would stake his life and go. Even if he had to kidnap Lung Yen to get him here. Who cared about his shitty advanced apothecary title? Lung Manor was located at a secluded place west of the city. It was close to the southern mountains, and there was no sign of human habitation. The surroundings were quiet, secluded and refined. Su Luo got out of the horse carriage. When she saw the scene in front of her, she couldn't help but frown slightly. In front of Lung Manor's door was a wide open space, but a lot of people now kneeled in that space, like a sea of black. From a rough estimate, there were unexpectedly more than 100 people. What was even more shocking was that even with so many people kneeling on the ground, none of them were making a sound. Each and every one of them was like the sculptures in temples, motionless, without words, like a pile of wood. At this moment, the dark red doors opened with a creak sound. From the door walked out a person in an embroidered robe. At one glance, you could tell he was a fair and clear-skinned middle-aged man that lived like a prince. He had both hands clasped behind his back, as he arrogantly slowly strolled out. He critically scanned the crowd of kneeling people. Whenever he passed in front of a person, the kneeling person would reverently raise up high the tray they were holding with both hands while bowing their heads. The red-painted tray held the precious gift that they brought with them. Some were medicinal herbs that were difficult to find, some were medical books, and some were pearls of jade and crystals. The only thing that was similar was that these stuff, without exception, were not ordinary goods. However, this steward of the Lung Manor's gaze was as cold as the manor's namesake, one. He was haughty and picky. He directly walked past 3 rows, and still hadn't seen anything he fancied. The places he passed, those people had difficulty covering up the despair in their eyes. Since the Lung household steward had no indication of being pleased, this told them that they had no chance. While the Lung household steward unhurriedly strolled among these people, he also indifferently sneered. Trash, all of this is trash. How dare all of you bring these garbage here to fool our master? Haha, let me tell all of you, not a chance. Hurry up and scram. 1. The Chinese character for Lung is cold in English. So the author is implying that the family's last name of cold is appropriated to describe his manner. Chapter 125. To adapt to one's taste, 2. When he had finished speaking, Steward Lung flung his sleeves into the air and went back inside. All of a sudden, a figure rushed from among the crowd of people. This child was around 5 or 6 years old. She had 2 pigtails, and she hung onto Lung household steward's leg and wailed. Steward Lung, I beg of you. Please, I beg you to give some medicine. My mother is about to be sick. Wah, begging you. The little girl's words seemed to resonate with everyone, and soon an unbroken succession of wailing sounds rose into the air. The sounds of weeping rose and fell in succession. Each was more mournful and miserable than the one before. However, Steward Lung's face remained impassive, as cold as his family name. He shook off the little girl as if discarding a rag, conveniently tossing her aside. He also brushed off his trouser leg, as if her touch was filthy. With a cold snort said, You want the medicine you seek? Only if you can provide our master with some treasure. You think he'll treat a patient and make medicine for free? Dream on. When he finished speaking, he coldly flung his sleeves to the side and left. Su Luo's eyebrows wrinkled. So having such a master as this Lung character would give rise to such a servant. This Steward Lung's words, actions and mannerisms were too arrogant. Then Apothecary Lung would probably also be extremely troublesome to deal with. However, even if you're an advanced apothecary, so what? Don't tell me that you could be better than the legendary Elder Zihua? His elder spent a lifetime of his own heart's blood to write obscure pill recipes. The book was now in her hands. Furthermore, she also had that world-famous Zihua's medicinal cauldron. How could Apothecary Lung have something of equal value? Su Luo raised an eyebrow to hint at Apothecary Zhua. A wry smile flashed through Apothecary Zhua's eyes. Apothecaries also had abridged ranks among themselves. He, as an intermediate apothecary, waved his status about in front of others. However, in front of an advanced apothecary, he could only be accommodating. And as everyone knows, this steward Lung had accompanied Apothecary Lung since childhood till now. They were very close, and while Apothecary Lung was wholeheartedly immersed in the study of medicine, he would leave everything else in the care of Steward Lung. Therefore it was always Steward Lung being arrogant in front of others, and nobody dared to be arrogant in front of him. Even take him Apothecary Zwa as an example. When meeting Steward Lung, he also could not straighten his spine. Apothecary Zwa put on a smile, called out to Steward Lung, who was just about to go back in. Steward Lung turned his head and saw Apothecary Zwa. He frowned slightly. His face had no sign of respect. Apothecary Zwa, why did you come again? Our master have no time to instructed you in those hideous messy recipes of yours. When he was done with his lecture, Steward Lung didn't even pause before walking into the doors, indicating to the servants that they should close it after him. The corner of Su Luo's mouth rose into a taunting sneer. You think that an advanced apothecary could be that extraordinary? A simple steward from your household could be so rude to an intermediate apothecary? Would even dare to close the doors in front of his face? How could he pay so little respect to his counterpart? Glancing again at Apothecary Zwa, she only saw him stroke his own beard. There was no sadness nor joy on his face, as if he had already anticipated the scenarios in front of him. He was not even a little mad by Steward Lung's manner. As if accustomed to such a scenario, it was easy to see Yama the king of hell, but little demons were hard to deal with. No wonder. It's not surprising that even Steward Su couldn't request Apothecary Lung to come. Su Luo coldly smiled, one hand preventing the doors from closing. Her voice firmly stated, "Wait a minute." Unexpectedly, there were actually someone reckless enough to block the door? Steward Lung thought this was inconceivable, and he revealed a face that had a pointed mouth and monkey cheeks. His pair of shrewd and haughty eyes were somber and cold while he opened them to stare at Su Luo. He arrogantly raised his chin and cast sideways glances at Su Luo. From where did this silly little girl run out of? Don't want to live anymore? Such a vulgar and rude steward. However, even though he was so capricious and mule-headed, there were still countless number of people kneeling and begging him to accept the gift their family carefully bought and selected using the entire family fortune. This fact again proved to Su Luo that on the continent, the occupation of an apothecary was case for how great a reverence. Chapter 126. To adapt to one's taste. 3. Su Luo lifted her eyebrows with a smile that was not a smile. May I ask, is Steward Su in? Steward Su. A complicated expression flashed across Steward Lung's face. Steward Su's identity was mysterious, and was not someone he could casually offend. He stared at Su Luo, turned around, then walked away, but he still left behind a single sentence. Let them in. Even though he was merely a steward, he was actually arrogant to this extent. Su Luo shook her head. She would not bother with this type of person. However, if he committed such offense within her hands, then he better beseech good fortune for himself. With a servant leading the way, Su Luo was very quickly reunited with Steward Su. Although Steward Su did not experience that kind of difficult situation of kneeling outside the doors, he was not much better off. Steward Lung had placed Steward Su in room located in a side wing of the manor. A young maid was standing on the side waiting for orders. If hungry, there were pastries on the table. If thirsty, there was tea that was neither hot nor cold, fulfilling the basic requirements mandated by etiquette. However, he still wouldn't let Steward Su meet with Apothecary Lung. Steward Su's entire face was full of anxiety. We can endure it, but Master can't. This won't do. I must personally look for Apothecary Lung. I don't believe that based on Master's prestige, that he Lung Yen would dare to utter the word no. Although this manor was the Tiger Wolf Regiment's secret base, in order to save His Highness, this kind of risk was worth taking. Su Luo frowned. Was he preparing to inform Apothecary Lung of Nangong Lian's identity? He could only see Su Luo blocking his path. Lowering her voice, she said, "The matter has not reached such an extent. How about this? Let me give it a try. Along the way, Su Luo had observed and heard everything. She already had a good grasp of Lung Yao's temperament. She merely lifted her hands to summon the servant to come, and softly instructed, "Bring me brush, paper and inkstone." Although the servant was puzzled, she nevertheless brought all the items Su Luo asked for. Sitting in front of the table, Su Luo's hand dipped the brush with ink. It seemed as if she was deep in thought, but in actuality, her spirit was already in her space. She remembered that when she was in the cave, in addition to picking up Elder Zihuo's obscure pill recipes, there were also another dozen yellow pages of short notes, with densely packed symbols and words. At that time, Su Luo's was in an urgent situation, and thus had no time to carefully examine it, only guessing that it could be primeval pill recipes. A moment ago, she heard apothecaries say that you could only move apothecary Lung Yan if you could give him primeval pill recipes. Therefore, Su Luo immediately thought of that stack of yellow papers left in the corner of her space. Su Luo picked it up and carefully flipped through it. Sure enough, every sheet of paper was a pill recipe. Also, it was clearly written on top of every sheet the words primeval pill recipes. Although Su Luo had never seen what other primeval pill recipes looked like, but Elder Zihuo's reputation was nevertheless a trustworthy guarantee. Anything that Elder Zihuo viewed as valuable enough to be put together with his obscure pill recipes could absolutely not be a fake. Su Luo randomly pulled one out, looked at it, and found that it was a recipe for rebirth of flesh pill. Rebirth of flesh pill, as the name implied, was the idea of regenerating new flesh. If someone had their hand or foot cut off, with the rebirth of flesh pill, it would be possible to regrow the limbs as before. This sheet of primeval pill recipes had been lost from the continent for a long time. Nobody would have predicted that it would once again appear in Su Luo's hands. Su Luo closely studied this sheet of primeval pill recipe. Not only were the required ingredients listed in detail, but it also successively listed every step in the procedure, every detail, and any possible problems that could come up, as well as the solutions to those problems. All of it had been painstakingly clearly recorded. Moreover, to refine this rebirth of flesh pill required the services of an advanced apothecary or higher. Su Luo was currently very far from an advanced apothecary, and it would require her to walk a long road to get there. Therefore, she did not care about this pill recipe. Naturally, if this sheet of pill recipe was still unable to move apothecary Lung, then Su Luo would consider offering him the Zihuo medicinal cauldron. After all, with regards to her thoughts, the Zihuo medicinal cauldron was merely a dead object, while Nangong Luyan was a responsibility that she could not shift to anyone else. Although Su Luo knew that the primeval pill recipe was very precious, but the facts afterwards proved that she had still excessively underestimated its worth. Chapter 127. To adapt to one's taste for. Su Luo decided on this rebirth of flesh pill recipe. After she memorized the words, she withdrew from her space and returned to reality. Because only her spirit went in, even if the task was accomplished in front of everyone, nobody would be able to see any flaw among her actions to be suspicious of. Su Luo's hand grasped the brush, and with a focused expression, she effortlessly started to write. Once she wrote about 1/3 of the recipe, the corner of her eyes perked up, and her lips formed a devious and sly smile. She stopped writing and picked up the paper that could move the heart of apothecary Lung. She blew on the paper to dry the ink marks left by the brush. She quickly blow-dried the ink marks. Su Luo called to a servant that was passing by with a look that screamed, "Don't question my order," and said, "Deliver this to your master apothecary Lung." The servant frowned. Ordinarily there inevitably would be guests who want to see apothecary Lung. They would secretly pass their business card through the servants to deliver to apothecary Lung. However, according to his knowledge, none of these people ever succeeded. Furthermore, they had to do it shouldering a huge risk. Therefore that servant without a second thought refused. However, Su Luo only gave an enigmatic smile and said, "Don't refuse so quickly. Don't you know, your chance to achieve meteoric success of a lifetime is certainly dependent on what's written on this paper." After she finished speaking, Su Luo immediately stuffed a heavy silver nugget in the servant's sleeves. Placing the icing on cakes, regardless of it being modern or ancient times, would always be applicable. The servant was also very bold. He didn't have to think very long before nodding his head. He securely folded his sleeves together and quickly left. Watching his back as he left, Su Luo's smile harbored some malicious intentions. In the midst of this encounter, Steward Su had a puzzled and unconvinced expression while watching Su Luo. Only now did he doubtfully inquire, "Miss Su, you have such certainty of the outcome? What exactly was written on that piece of paper?" Steward Su was very intrigued. Su Luo lifted the teacup while showing no signs of nerves. She took a sip of tea. After putting the cup down, her eyelids dropped slightly while her mouth curved into a smile. "It's not me," with the assurance. "Rather, that sheet with the pill recipe is determined." Does Steward Su know what the most precious treasure is to Apothecary Lung? Steward Su earnestly said, "This is not difficult to guess. It definitely is primeval pill recipes." With regards to apothecaries, all of them had a strong longing for primeval pill recipes. However, primeval pill recipes had already been lost on the continent. Even the parts that were not lost was hidden within the control of large and influential families. It certainly would not exist within the hands of ordinary apothecaries. Su Luo pursed her lips and smiled. Her smile was profoundly mysterious. Just when Steward Su was hesitating on what to say, suddenly the sound of hurried footsteps came from outside. Following that, the door to the room was urgently pushed open. The person that came was none other than Steward Lung, who had previously glanced at Su Luo with dislike. Only gloom could be seen on his grumpy face. Those arrogant and critical eyes swept Su Luo a quick glance, while haughtily asked her, "Was it you who delivered a slip of paper to our master?" Su Luo's gaze was unperturbed. Her snow-white skin gave off an icy and distant impression. She raised an eyebrow at him, not denying nor admitting anything. Steward Lung coldly smiled and sneered. "Didn't expect that you, such a girl, would have such a scheme planned. Let me tell you, you are very lucky, for our master had agreed to see you. Now come with me." Steward Lung's attitude toward Su Luo was full of disdain, and even seemed to hold her in contempt. Now his condescending manner was like a noble giving charity to Su Luo, who happened to be poor. Although Steward Su was furious at Steward Lung's attitude, after hearing that Apothecary Lung had agreed to see Su Luo, the corner of his eyes and eyebrows crinkled into a joyful expression. This means it was entirely possible that Apothecary Lung could potentially personally act to save a life. However, Su Luo's behavior made his eyes pop open. Su Luo's face remained calm. Her icy glass-like beautiful eyes indifferently glanced at Steward Lung. She turned toward Steward Su and serenely said, "We have been here for quite some time, and don't know how the sick person is doing in our family. Let's go back home and take a look first." Chapter 128. To adapt to one's taste 5. Having finished speaking, she unhurriedly turned around and walked away. Her footsteps were exceptionally firm. The view of her back gave an extremely decisive feeling. Steward Lung would never have thought that Su Luo would walk away. Moreover, when she said she would leave, she had directly and efficiently left, without a trace of dragging her feet. For a period of time, he was somewhat stunned. Among the people who came to seek treatment, who wasn't groveling or trembling with fear? This loathsome girl had no discerning eyes, unable to tell good from bad. Steward Lung had a gloomy look on his face, and coldly sneered at Su Luo. He loudly threatened, "Once you walk out of this door, you'd better not expect our master to personally undertake the task of medical treatment. You'd better think carefully." This type of threat, for 100 tries, was 100% effective. But this time was an exception. Su Luo's figure paused. She glanced back and smiled in a charming and touching manner. "Steward Lung, I look forward to seeing you again." Finished speaking, with an indifferent expression, Su Luo turned around and resolutely walked out. In fact, Steward Lung really wanted to grab Su Luo and drag her to see Apothecary Lung. However, he didn't know why this calm and tranquil Su Luo gave him a strong feeling of deterrence. It made him acknowledge her, a reverence that prevented him from even resisting her. Steward Lung coldly snorted, darkly cursing her. You loathsome girl who doesn't know what's good for you. If you have the guts to walk out of these doors, then you'd better not come back crying and begging to enter again. Since he was done cursing at her, while heading towards Apothecary Lung's refining room, he also tried to come up with ideas to tattletale on this loathsome girl to get her in trouble. Su Luo walked out of the door. She saw Steward Su manner, which indicated he was hesitant to speak, and she just gave him a smile. It's okay, relax. We will just wait here for Apothecary Lung. Wait for Apothecary Lung? Miss Su, you could actually say that even now? Was Apothecary Lung someone who, when a person wanted to see, would actually get to see? Much less even expecting him to personally come out? It was said that for more than 10 years, Apothecary Lung hadn't taken even half a step outside of his manor. Okay? Steward Su really wanted to yell at Su Luo, but seeing her pretty and delicate manner, he really hadn't the heart to do so. Such an opportunity like this that was hard to come by, was wasted by her. Steward Su panted with rage, and turned his face away. The corner of Su Luo's mouth arched up slightly. A smiling expression flashed through her eyes. Her heart was very certain. Since the haughty and arrogant Steward Lung could personally invite her, then it was enough proof that Rebirth of Flesh pill recipe had already fallen into Apothecary Lung's hands. Since that half a page of only a third of primeval pill recipe had already fallen into Apothecary Lung's hands. With Apothecary Lung's gaze, why should she worry that the other side wouldn't know what it was? Currently, as the seller at the marketplace, Su Luo was the real boss. No matter how rude and unreasonable Apothecary Lung was, what could he possibly do to her? He would definitely still come and beseech her. Su Luo's mouth turned up into a cold and cruel smile. She was looking forward to the raging tempest that Steward Lung was about to encounter. Speaking of Steward Lung, who was rejected by Su Luo, afterwards, he had taken large strides towards Apothecary Lung's refining room. However, before he could even knock on the door to ask permission to enter, those eternally closed doors abruptly opened. At the door was an impatient and deeply worried face. This was a 40 to 50 years old middle-aged man. He had a scrawny figure, and his hair and eyebrows were a complete mess. He had a manner that showed he didn't care about his appearance. The white robe on his body had stains all over it. He looked somewhat disheveled and unkempt. Before waiting for Apothecary Lung to speak, Steward Lung had already started to complain. Master, that loathsome girl doesn't know what's good for her. This servant, under your orders, went to invite her. But who would have thought that she would unexpectedly stand up, turn and leave? She was beyond hateful. Apothecary Lung's eyes suddenly became severe. He grabbed Steward Lung by the collar, while grinding his teeth asked, "What did you say?" Steward Lung thought Apothecary Lung was infuriated, because his pride had been provoked. He was overflowing with joy, which increased his courage to make up something more sinister. Even though initially there was nothing to complain about. That loathsome girl also said. She said that there was nothing amazing about you. Not wanting to meet is fine, but she never placed you in her eyes as being worthy of respect. Chapter 129. To adapt to one's taste. 6. Truly hateful. Apothecary Lung cursed loudly. Steward Lung's heart was overjoyed, however. Before his smile could reach his eyes, he was thrown to the ground by Apothecary Lung, who then harshly scolded. It must be you, you repulsive servant, who arrogantly and rudely slighted her. Humph. If that mist disappears, see how I will fix you. Even though he had finished speaking, Apothecary Lung's fury had not subsided. Thus he kicked Steward Lung's face with his foot. He immediately rushed out in his dirty and stained work clothes. Steward Lung held his head that was dizzy and confused from being kicked. He was so depressed that he was about to go insane. Up to now, he still wasn't clear why such a small piece of paper would have such great charm. It actually made his master immediately run out, abandoning the medicinal pill, which he had been working on for 79 days, without a thought. Since Steward Lung was able to keep his position for many years, he could not be a complete idiot. He crawled up and staggered along, chasing after Apothecary Lung's silhouette to the manor's gate. Apothecary Lung dashed to the doorway and saw a sea of people dressed in black in front of the gate. However, he didn't know who among them was the mist that had written the primeval pill recipe. As for the dense mass of people in front of the gate, who hadn't ever met Apothecary Lung, they thus were unable to recognize that the dirty, unkempt old man in front of them was the one they had been crying and begging to meet. Exactly at this time, Steward Lung also came out, taking large strides towards Su Luo. His expression had completely changed. He was no longer arrogant, rather, he now had a fawning manner. He flatteringly smiled and stood in front of Su Luo, blocking her path. "This miss, please wait. My master has personally come look there." Su Luo serenely shot him a quick glance and turned to the direction he was looking at. Rebirth of flesh pill recipe. Apothecary Lung's face had an excited and moved expression as he opened his mouth to inquire. Su Luo only smiled and handed him another piece of paper. Su Luo had already divided the rebirth of flesh pill recipe into 3 parts. The first part had already been given to Apothecary Lung. Now, she handed over the second part. Su Luo calmly watched Apothecary Lung. She didn't believe that this wouldn't entice him. Sure enough, as Su Luo had expected, Lung Yen, this person, was a pure medicine fanatic. He had characteristics similar to an artist. He didn't care about his appearance, nor could he be bothered with trifles. His entire body and mind was engrossed in the occupation of refining medicine. Because of this, he was willing to struggle for a lifetime. Everything else in his eyes were total. "I want to invite Apothecary Lung to save a person. I don't know if Apothecary Lung will come." Su Lu faintly smiled when she saw Apothecary Lung burying his entire face in that piece of paper. "What about the last part of the recipe?" Apothecary Lung had an excited expression that was hard to conceal. "If you can cure the person, then naturally I will offer this recipe with both hands." Su Luo smiled while watching him. "However, if Apothecary Lung isn't certain of your ability to cure him, then just pretend that I never said these words." Finished speaking, Su Luo turned and started to walk away. "Fine. This old man will go with you to save the person." Apothecary Lung was strung along by the 2/3 of that primeval pill recipe until his heart itched terribly. He was itching to get the complete recipe and to thoroughly study it for 7 days and nights. Apothecary Lung is indeed a person who knows what's what. Unlike some people, ha. Su Luo glared at Steward Lung with a smile that was not a smile. Now, a distinct footprint could be seen on Steward Lung's face, clearly indicating that he had been stepped on by someone. Apothecary Lung coldly glared at Steward Lung. "Once I return, I'll take care of you." When he was done speaking, he took the initiative to climb up into the horse carriage. He incessantly urged Su Luo, "Hurry, quickly get on. What are you waiting for?" Obviously, Su Luo's 2/3 of the primeval pill recipe had succeeded in inciting his interest, to the point that he was pulling his ears and scratching his cheeks. He wished that he could promptly cure the sick person and get the complete pill recipe. "Nangong Luyan, wait for me. I will definitely have someone cure you." Su Luo secretly clenched her hands into fists. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.